Chapter 139. Xianxia calmly looked at the group of young people in front of him. Among the group of young people, the youngest was about 20 years old, and the oldest was no more than 25 years old. They were all dressed very fashionably, and a few of them were very handsome. However, they did not stand properly, and the moment they opened their mouths were full of obscenities, inadvertently giving people a frivolous and vulgar feeling. The leader was about 24 or 25 years old. After his companions surrounded the door of the tea house, he stood in front of Xianxia with a cigarette in his mouth. As if he wanted to create momentum for himself, the young man didn't hold back and directly blew a smoke ring at Xianxia. However, he didn't expect the wind to be very strong today. So just as he blew out the smoke ring, a sudden gust of wind blew the smoke ring directly into his face. Choked by the smoke, the young man immediately lowered his head and couldn't help but rub his eyes. As a result, the imposing manner that he had deliberately created was destroyed and completely disappeared. This young man was called Wang Hao, and he was also a famous person in Shangjing's nightclub circle. Whenever it was night time, it was time for Wang Hao to shuttle through the major bars. Recently, Wuxia suddenly set off a hip-hop craze, just like the rock craze of the 80s and 90s, which suddenly became popular all over the country. Wang Hao was one of the first underground rappers. After catching up with the hip-hop craze, he was also in the limelight in Shangjing. Most of the bars in Hohai were small bars, so Wang Hao wasn't familiar with this area. The reason why he brought people here today was because one of his brothers was cheated of money by a bartender. His brother was related to him and just came out from his hometown to mingle with him. Before, he was a very honest person and didn't see much of the world, so he didn't understand the twists and turns of the bar. After chatting with the keyboard player online for a while, the brother suddenly became hot-headed and wanted to ask the girl to come out and meet. Coincidentally, the bartender that the boss arranged for him was Qiao Yuan. In terms of appearance, Qiao Yuan's appearance was definitely the best among the group of bartenders. As a young man who had just come to Shangjing, when had he ever been in close contact with a beauty of this level? Therefore, he was mesmerized by Qiao Yuan at that time. Qiao Yuan didn't say much to him before he excitedly ordered some wine. The more he drank, the more confused he became. In the end, he directly opened a big order of 20,000 yuan. 20,000 yuan, 20% for the keyboard, 40% for the bartender, and another 40% for the boss. After the order was confirmed, Qiao Yuan would get 8,000 yuan. Usually, the bill would only be settled once every half a month or a month. That was because if the customer called the police, the bill would be refunded. Therefore, the money had not yet reached Qiao Yuan's hands. It was rare to see someone like Wang Hao who didn't call the police and instead brought his own people to cause trouble. Everyone was in the same business. Wang Hao was in the right now, so the boss decisively refunded the 20,000 yuan to him. But what was strange was that Wang Hao was not satisfied with the money he got back. He actually asked the boss to hand over Qiao Yuan. This request was too much. The boss couldn't agree, so he tried to negotiate with them. However, while the boss was negotiating with Wang Hao, a girl who was usually jealous of Qiao Yuan secretly betrayed Qiao Yuan. Therefore, Wang Hao brought people directly to the tea house. The girl who betrayed them was very clever and didn't expose herself. The boss also didn't know who betrayed them. When he saw Wang Hao rushing to the tea house with his men, the owner was a little anxious and hurriedly made a call for help. Refund was a reasonable request, but taking people away was absolutely not. Otherwise, how could he continue to mingle on this street? Unfortunately, it was only 3 in the afternoon, so the thugs were still sleeping at home. After the boss vented his anger on the phone, he looked at the tea house not far away with worry. Most of the people who could open a shop in Hohai weren't easy to deal with. A strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, after Wang Hao fiercely threw the cigarette butt on the ground, he casually said to Xianxia, "Are you the boss of this shop?" "Yes. This has nothing to do with you. Just hand over that Qiao and we'll leave immediately. We won't hinder your business." After saying that, Wang Hao squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Xianxia. If people who play rock have a wanton temperament, then people who play hip-hop are obviously their upgraded version. They always act like they are the boss and don't even put Mother Earth in their eyes. However, Xianxia's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. He saw Xianxia suddenly smiled and casually replied, "Qiao? I don't know, there's no such person here." F***ck, Are you trying to scare us? Brother Hao, don't talk nonsense with him. Let's go in and search. Don't let that girl run away. Yes, go in and search. Wang Hao didn't speak. He just looked up and down at Chen Shi. However, the group of young people behind him suddenly couldn't sit still. Chen Shi slowly glanced at the people in front of him. His expression didn't change. He stood quietly at the door of the tea house, as if he didn't intend to let Wang Hao and the others in. But at this moment, a young man who was originally standing at the back of the crowd suddenly moved. He suddenly turned around, picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground, and then directly smashed it toward the tea house's glass. Bang! The expected sound of glass breaking did not ring out. The glass seemed to be tempered glass, and the stone only made a loud collision sound when it hit it. The stone fell to the ground, but the glass didn't move. The young man was not convinced. After fiercely staring at Chen Shi, he picked up the stone from the ground again. But this time, he didn't smash the stone out. Instead, he stood directly in front of the glass window with the stone. Bang! 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 The young man held the stone and smashed the glass with all his strength. Qin Ruoying sat on the chair next to Qiao Yuan with the little girl in her arms. The little girl shrank in Qin Ruoying's arms. This movement not only scared the little girl, but also the guests in the tea house. Seeing that the young man kept smashing the glass with a stone, the guests retreated to the corner. This group of young people was simply lawless. The young man smashed the stone for a while, but there was still no trace of damage on the glass. At this moment, Chen Shi spoke. That's tempered glass. Be careful, don't hurt your own hand and come back to me later to pay for the medical expenses. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man picked up the stone and smashed it again as if he didn't hear him at all. Bang! The loud collision sounded again. Immediately after, the young man suddenly let out a wail that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Everyone hurriedly turned to look, only to see him covering his right hand with his left hand and constantly shouting. Blood dripped down from his fingers. It seemed that Chen Shi was right. Chapter 140. Smashing the glass and injuring his own hand? This sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. It seems to be quite serious. Quickly take him to the doctor to stop the bleeding. Turn left on this street. There is a small clinic less than 200 meters away. Seeing that the young man's hand was bleeding profusely, Chen Shi reminded Wang Hao with a smile. After hearing Chen Shi's words, Wang Hao seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He hurriedly asked someone to take the injured person to the clinic to stop the bleeding. After the injured person left, the group of young people in front of him could not help but look at each other. They wanted to smash someone else's glass as a demonstration, but they did not expect to injure their own hand instead of breaking the glass. This was truly a great loss of face. Wang Hao coughed a little awkwardly. But immediately after, he said to Chen Shi with some annoyance, "Boss, I didn't bring so many brothers here today to stand here in the cold wind. You open the door to do business, so you should know that it's better to avoid trouble. How about you let the girl come out, and we'll part on good terms?" Chen Shi did not respond. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. "CNM. Do you believe that we'll smash your broken tea house?" It was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence. Hearing this, Chen Shi thought for a moment, then asked with some doubt, "Didn't we smash it just now?" As soon as these words came out, it was like a spark falling into a pile of gunpowder. The group of young people in front of him was instantly ignited by him. A few of the hot-tempered ones were about to rush up on the spot. Looking at their aggressive postures, it seemed like they were about to make a move. However, before Chen Shi could react, Wang Hao had already opened his arms and stopped them. Wang Hao was not stupid, and he was already past the age of fighting for personal feelings. Although he usually acted extremely arrogantly, in reality, he was very measured in his actions. This was not a small county, but the capital of Wuxia, Shangjing. The water in Shangjing was very deep. If you casually threw a brick on the street, it could hit a big shot that they absolutely could not afford to offend. Wang Hao had come from a small county and had finally made a name for himself. So how could he do something as stupid as taking the lead to cause trouble? Even if they wanted to make a scene, they would only do so after he left. Just like wine stalls, every industry had its own rules of survival. Throwing stones and smashing glass was actually not a problem at all. Even if they rushed in and smashed things up, they would only need to pay some money in the end. Article 275 of the Criminal Law clearly stipulates that, in cases of intentional destruction of property, if the loss of public or private property exceeds 5,000 renminbi, the case shall be filed for prosecution. In other words, as long as the loss did not exceed 5,000 yuan, the police would not file a case. These days, hooligans were not scary. What was scary was that hooligans were cultured. Therefore, it was fine to smash the shop, but not to beat people up. Now that there were so many people watching, if this person were to lie on the ground and insist that there was something wrong with his brain, then they would obviously have to spend a short holiday in the police station. However, Wang Hao's patience had been worn out by Chen Shi. After signaling them not to make a move, Wang Hao spat on the ground and said fiercely, "Go in and find him." After saying that, Wang Hao stared coldly at Chen Shi, as if warning Chen Shi not to blindly interfere. Following his order, the young people behind Wang Hao swarmed toward the door of the tea house. However, they were wrong. They did not make a move, but that did not mean that Chen Shi would not make a move. Chen Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with them. If anyone dared to approach the door, he would kick them. Being a bartender was not a glorious profession. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Chen Shi wanted Qiao Yuan to go out and give them an explanation. After all, it was Qiao Yuan who was wrong first. But unfortunately, this group of young people were very stubborn. Under their superficial skin was an infinitely inflated heart. The group of people wanted to hang a sign on their faces as they walked, saying, "I am the most awesome, I am the best in the world." Their aggressive appearance also scared Nian Nian. Therefore, the side that was supposed to be in the right was particularly hateful in Chen Shi's eyes. The two young people who rushed at the front thought that Chen Shi did not dare to stop them, so they did not even look at Chen Shi and rushed toward the door. However, just as they were about to touch the door of the tea house, Chen Shi suddenly kicked them back. Chen Shi had a sense of propriety. He did not hurt them, but made it impossible for them to get close to the door. Looking at the two brothers who were kicked back by Chen Shi, Wang Hao suddenly flew into a rage. "TMD! You dare to make a move? Beat them to death!" Since the other party had made a move, how could he tolerate it? Therefore he led the charge. At this moment, the door behind Chen Shi suddenly opened. "Stop!" With a shout, Qiao Yuan hurriedly ran in front of Chen Shi, and then directly blocked him behind her. Qiao Yuan glanced at Wang Hao with slight fear in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she pretended to be calm and said, "This has nothing to do with Boss Chen. I am Qiao Qiao. If you have any problems, come at me." Qiao Yuan had been paying attention to the movement outside the door. When she heard that they were about to make a move, she could not help but rush out. Although Qiao Yuan did not understand why these people were looking for her, there was no doubt that this was caused by her, so she could not implicate others. Wang Hao stopped and looked at Qiao Yuan. He could not help but show a strange expression on his face. Qiao Yuan was not stupid. When she realized that the other party had brought a lot of people, she decisively called the police. Therefore, standing in front of Wang Hao, Qiao Yuan had some confidence. She held the phone and shook it in a circle. Then, Qiao Yuan continued to say to Wang Hao, "I'm warning you not to mess around. I just called the police. The police will be here soon." Hearing this, Wang Hao could not help but laugh. He casually mocked, "Call the police? What? What law did we break? B*TCH. Let me tell you. It was a small matter, but now you've made a big deal out of it. Just you wait." After he finished speaking, he pointed at Qiao Yuan fiercely. Qiao Yuan was frightened by him. She could not help but take a small step back. But what was strange was that Wang Hao did not do anything. Instead, he brought his people directly to the opposite side of the street. Then, they stood in a row against the railing. Qiao Yuan was a little confused. She could not help but turn to look at Chen Shi and ask, "What happened to them? Did you call the police?" "Ah, I called the police." "Then let's wait for the police to come." After he finished speaking, Chen Shi turned and returned to the tea house. Qiao Yuan looked back at Wang Hao and his people with some doubts. She realized that he was still staring at her fiercely, so she followed Chen Shi into the tea house in fear. Gangsters had a characteristic, which was that they bullied the weak and feared the strong. So when they heard that the police were coming, they immediately became obedient. But so what if the police came? Were they going to take them all back to the police station? In Wang Hao's words, that was Chapter 141. After hearing that Xiao Yuan had called the police, Wang Hao and his men dispersed. Gathering a crowd to make trouble? No, they just came to Ho Hai to see the scenery. Xiao Yuan was still a little confused, but seeing that Wang Hao and his men hadn't left, she didn't dare to run around and could only obediently follow Xianxia back to the tea house. After Xianxia returned to the tea house, the guests at the two tables gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Boss, you're amazing, you're a real man." Not to mention who was right and who was wrong, just Xianxia blocking the entrance of the tea house by himself was enough to make them applaud and praise him. This boss was very competent. Qin Ruiying whispered to the little girl at the bar, making her giggle from time to time. After seeing that Xianxia had returned, the little girl immediately rubbed against Qin Ruiying's arms and reached out for Xianxia to carry her. After Xianxia picked her up from Qin Ruiying's arms, the little girl asked sweetly, "Papa, what were you doing outside?" Papa was reasoning with them. Why? Did they scare you? Hearing this, the little girl immediately shook her head and pouted, "No, I don't like them." Children were sometimes very strange, and the first impression a stranger left on them was very important. If this person was someone they liked, then they would immediately be very kind to this person, as if they were familiar with him. But if this person wasn't someone they liked, then sorry, the child would stay as far away as possible. Unless their parents were around, they wouldn't get too close. The group of people outside was obviously not the little girl's favorite. Xianxia touched the little girl's little face and said with a smile, "This is our home. If you don't like them, then Papa won't let them in, okay?" Okay. The little girl happily acted coquettishly. At this time, Xiao Yuan slowly walked over. After hesitating for a moment, she said very embarrassedly, "Boss, I'm sorry for the trouble." After saying that, Xiao Yuan suddenly bowed to Xianxia. Before Xianxia could say anything, Qin Ruiying waved at her and smiled. "It's nothing. Why don't you come over and have a chat?" Hearing the lady boss's words, Xiao Yuan obediently sat beside her. "How long have you been in this business?" "Half a month." "How much did you earn?" Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then, she said hesitantly, "If this order is included, it should be more than 20,000 yuan. However, the bill hasn't been paid yet. Why do you want to do this? If I remember correctly, you are a student of Beijing Normal University, right?" Qing Bei is from Beijing Normal University, and Beijing Normal University is known as one of the 4 famous universities in Beijing. It can even be ranked in the top 20 in the country. Do you think it's appropriate for a student from Beijing Normal University to be a prostitute? Qin Ruiying's voice was very soft and gentle, but every word pierced Xiao Yuan's heart. Xiao Yuan lowered her head in silence. After a long while, her tears flowed down silently. Seeing that his wife was about to talk about life ideals with others, Xianxia held the little fellow and sat in the center of the lobby, leaving some private space for them. Xiao Yuan sobbed in a low voice. Qin Ruiying waited for a moment, then took out a few tissues and handed them to her. "Can you tell me why?" Xiao Yuan took the tissues and wiped her tears. After taking a deep breath, she looked at Qin Ruiying and said sadly, "My father is sick. He needs money. I've done a lot of work, but I can't make any money. Someone recommended me to work in a KTV. I was afraid, so I didn't go. But I really need money, so they recommended me to be a prostitute." Xiao Yuan's family was very ordinary. Her father was a middle school teacher, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. Their income was not high. They relied on her father's tuition classes to earn some extra money. Their family barely reached the standard of a well-off family. She was a very happy girl. Although her family was not rich, she did not have to worry about food and clothing. Her family was happy. She could be regarded as a pretty girl in a small family. Xiao Yuan also worked hard. She was the top liberal arts scholar in her county during the college entrance examination. However, sometimes the reality was more cliché than stories. After all, life was like an electrocardiogram. If it was smooth sailing, it meant that you were dead. 3 years ago, Xiao Yuan's father was diagnosed with chronic uremia. So there were only 2 paths left in front of them: lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant. The price of dialysis was not too expensive. The charge was slightly different in each place. The price of a single dialysis was about 400 yuan. A patient had to undergo dialysis at least 3 or 4 times a week, about 13 times a month. It cost 5,200 yuan, About 60,000 yuan a year. 60,000 yuan didn't sound like much. However, for an ordinary family in a small county, this was already a huge expense. Because of his health, Qiao Yuan's father was forced to close the tuition classes. However, he did not quit. Instead, he insisted on going to work every day. Qiao Yuan's father often said, Qiao, don't worry about family matters. Just study hard. When you graduate and find a good job, Dad can enjoy life. This illness was not life-threatening for a while, but it would put a lot of financial pressure on a family. So every time Qiao Yuan returned home, she would feel that her parents had aged a lot. It was also because of this that Qiao Yuan worked part-time while studying hard to earn scholarships since her freshman year. She had done many jobs, such as waitress, tutor, courier, and part-time model. Part-time model was the fastest way to earn money, but this kind of good thing was not common. In fact, she had the qualifications to become a contract model, but Qiao Yuan did not forget that she was still a student. So, she decisively refused. She wanted to give her father a kidney transplant, but it was a sky-high price. The kidney source started at 200,000 yuan, and the surgery cost 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. After the kidney transplant was successful, he would need to take anti-rejection drugs, which cost about 10,000 yuan a month. After half a year, she would have to pray that there would be no infection or rejection. Otherwise, the condition might worsen. Moreover, a kidney source was not easy to find. Although a kidney transplant might not be able to cure him, compared to lifelong dialysis, a kidney transplant was indeed the most ideal treatment. So, Qiao Yuan only wanted to save 300,000 yuan as soon as possible, in case a suitable kidney source appeared in the future and she did not have the money to give her father a kidney transplant. Qiao Yuan was very thrifty. Even the clothes she was wearing were borrowed from her best friend. There were 38 cups of black tea in Chen Shi's tea house. If it were not for the fact that the bar saleswoman had to wait near the bar at all times, and sometimes she would wait for a whole day, she would not come in and sit down for a cup of tea. Being a bar saleswoman was indeed very profitable. In addition, she had some beauty. So, Qiao Yuan had successfully slaughtered a few fat sheep in just half a month. The money came so easily, but it also made Qiao Yuan feel a sense of guilt. So, she saved these people's phone numbers. She had already decided that when her father recovered from his illness, she would return the money to these people one by one and sincerely say, "Thank you." She really could not think of any other way, so, sorry. Qin Ruoying was a very qualified listener. She sat there and quietly listened to Qiao Yuan's story. After Qiao Yuan finished her story, Qiao Yuan could no longer hold it in. She suddenly lay on the bar counter and burst into tears. Perhaps she had been suppressed for too long, so the girl cried very sadly. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying gently put the tissue next to Qiao Yuan. Then, she looked at Chen Shi thoughtfully. Chen Shi saw this and nodded gently at her. With his 5 senses, he could easily determine whether the girl was lying or not. When Qiao Yuan was talking just now, Chen Shi was listening quietly by the side. So he was very sure that the girl was not lying. Chapter 142. After listening to Qiao Yuan's story for a few minutes, there was a burst of sirens on the street outside. The Ministry of Public Security's 110 Police Service Standardization Standards clearly stated that police personnel must respond quickly after receiving a police order. Any major threat to the personal and property safety of citizens. Emergency call for help. In the city, they must arrive at the scene within 5 minutes. In the suburbs, they must arrive at the scene within 10 minutes. This was a hard indicator, so don't make a false police report. Otherwise, you will be invited to drink tea for a few hours. Seeing that the police came, Chen Shi handed the little guy to Qin Ruoying, and he walked out with Qiao Yuan. The police car stopped in front of the tea house. The driver was a middle-aged policeman, and the policeman in the passenger seat was younger, about the same age as Wang Hao. At first glance, it was the standard of a civilian police and an auxiliary police. The middle-aged policeman was not polite. After glancing at Wang Hao and his group, he directly asked Chen Shi, "Did you call the police?" Chen Shi nodded. When he was about to explain the situation to the policeman, the middle-aged policeman pointed at Wang Hao and his group and asked, "Is it them?" Hearing this, Qiao Yuan suddenly acted like a class monitor reporting to the teacher. She quickly interrupted and said, "It's them." They just blocked the entrance of the tea house and caused trouble. They even smashed the window. Did they do anything? Did they suffer any losses? Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. After glancing at the untouched window, she said with some difficulty, "They didn't do anything. It seems that there are no losses." "Okay, I got it." The middle-aged policeman nodded, then turned and walked directly across the street. This was a bar street, so there were often some drunk people causing trouble here. As a policeman in the area, he had seen too many, so he was not surprised by these situations. "Who's the leader?" As soon as the middle-aged policeman's voice fell, Wang Hao immediately replied with a smile, "There's no leader. Just a few friends gathering here, chatting and looking at the scenery of Ho Hai." "Don't give me that. Hurry up and leave. Do what you need to do." The middle-aged policeman glared at him and waved his hand to let them leave. Seeing this, Wang Hao said with some dissatisfaction, "Hey, officer, we didn't break the law, right? This is not Zongnanhai. Are we not allowed to hang out here?" "That's right. Isn't this bar street? We still have to wait for the night to drink," one of the lackeys casually added. But when he spoke, his eyes were looking at Ho Hai, as if he didn't dare to look at the middle-aged policeman. The middle-aged policeman was also a veteran. He naturally knew how to deal with this group of punks, so he immediately said to Wang Hao, "Take out your ID card." Wang Hao didn't seem to hear him clearly. The middle-aged policeman glanced at him, then suddenly saluted him. Then he took out his ID and said seriously, "There have been many robberies around here. In order to ensure the safety of the people, I have the right to interrogate you. Please cooperate with the investigation. Otherwise, I have the right to forcibly summon you. If you have any objections, you can call 110 or 12,389 to complain. This is my police number. Please show me your ID card." Wang Hao was terrified when he saw that the middle-aged policeman seemed to have changed into a different person in an instant. Therefore, he quickly squeezed out a smile and saluted to the policeman. Then he said with a cheeky smile, "Understood, right away, we'll leave right away." After that, he called his brothers and left. The middle-aged policeman saw that he was tactful, so he was satisfied and took back his ID. As a basic policeman, he was also considered to be a very responsible kind, so he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was going to wait until Wang Hao and his group left. Under the gaze of the middle-aged policeman, Wang Hao had to reluctantly take his group to their car. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So before he left, he didn't forget to give Xianxia a middle finger, and then slowly made a gesture of slitting his neck. Looking at his posture, he seemed to be silently telling Xianxia that this matter wasn't over yet. The characteristics of hooligans, besides bullying the weak and fearing the strong, were also disgusting. If a business offended them, they wouldn't hurt them, but they would endlessly harass them, making it impossible for them to do business. Xiao Yuan also understood what Wang Hao wanted to express, so she quickly said to Xianxia, "Boss, I'm sorry. I'll go and explain it to them." After that, she wanted to chase after Wang Hao and his group. This matter had to be resolved. Why not take advantage of the fact that the police were still here and have a good talk with Wang Hao? At most, she would just have to pay for it. However, Xiao Yuan had just taken 2 steps when Xianxia suddenly pulled her back, then shook his head at her, indicating that she shouldn't go. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan really thought of this matter too simply. Wang Hao was obviously coming for her. Although she didn't know what they wanted to do, it was obviously not for money. There must be another purpose. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still confused, Xianxia sighed softly, "Don't go. I think they're not doing it for money, but for you as a person." "Me as a person? What do you mean?" "Boss, I don't understand." However, Xianxia shook his head and didn't explain further. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan could only stand beside Xianxia obediently. The boss had just saved her, so he shouldn't be a bad person. Listening to him should be the right thing to do. Wang Hao and his group drove 4 cars. They weren't luxury cars, but after the cars started, there was a rumbling sound. Obviously, they were modified cars, and the throttle was changed and the turbine was installed, so when the accelerator was stepped on, there was a deafening roar. As if to demonstrate, when Wang Hao drove past the door of the tea house, he deliberately stepped on the accelerator, making the noise even louder. Xiao Yuan couldn't help but cover her ears. The middle-aged policeman stood silently by the side, looking at Wang Hao and his group with a blank face. He was a policeman, not a traffic policeman, so he couldn't do anything about this kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have detained these bastards' cars. Wang Hao rolled down the window, spitting out a mouthful of saliva, then opened his mouth and silently said, F***CKU. Then, he gave Xianxia the middle finger again, changing gears, braking, and stepping on the accelerator. After a set of smooth operations, Wang Hao laughed wildly and sped up. The 4 modified cars roared and sped away in an instant. The middle-aged policeman shook his head, as if he was lamenting the degeneration of the world. However, at this moment, Xianxia suddenly waved his arm. Then, Wang Hao's car slammed into the railing of Ho Hai. Bang! In order to send them on their way, Xianxia even broke the railing. Therefore, when Wang Hao's car hit the railing immediately broke, and his car flew into Ho Hai. The skating rink in Ho Hai usually opened in January. Although some places were already frozen, it wasn't very thick. The car fell into the water, causing a huge splash. The middle-aged policeman was stunned by the scene in front of him. It wasn't until the car slowly sank into the water that he suddenly came back to his senses, and quickly called the auxiliary police to help him save people. It was just a small punishment and a big warning, not really taking their lives. Therefore, in order to prevent any accidents, Xianxia had already considerately opened the car door for Wang Hao while he was still in the air. Chapter 143. This year was not a warm winter, but a cold winter. So in December, the water surface of Ho Hai had already condensed a thin layer of ice. Wang Hao's car was filled with 5 people. After the car drove into the water, the 5 people struggled to swim back to the shore. The other people on the shore hurriedly pulled them up. Looking at the people who were squeezing into the car, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but sigh. Karma. Although tourists accidentally fell into Ho Hai from time to time, the middle-aged policeman had been in this area for so long, and he really hadn't heard of anyone who could drive a car into Ho Hai. The car was probably scrapped, and how to get it out had become a big problem. It was estimated that the Shikahai sub-district community would seek compensation from them. This group of stinky brats was also unlucky. But this was no longer the middle-aged policeman's business, so he called the young policeman and prepared to leave. Comrade, take care. After Xianxia smiled and said hello to the middle-aged policeman, he took Xiao Yuan back to the tea house. As soon as they walked into the tea house, Qin Ruoying glanced at Xianxia with a smile. She knew what happened outside, so she guessed that this must be Xianxia's good deed. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. A little punishment is okay. After being disturbed by this group of bastards, the guests at the table who just left didn't even pay the bill. Now they didn't know where they went. After the couple cleaned up the teacups at their table, they returned to the bar with the little girl in their arms. Xiao Yuan stood in the lobby stupidly and looked at their calm appearance. For a while, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, Xiao Yuan came to the bar, bowed to the couple, and said sincerely, "Boss, lady boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying said with a smile, "Give you a piece of advice, don't do this in the future. This is not a glorious career. With your education, you should be able to find a very good job in the future. I hope you can distinguish the priorities and don't ruin your future." After hearing her words, Xiao Yuan fell silent. After hesitating for a while, she nodded lightly and said in a low voice with a complicated expression, "I understand. Thank you, lady boss." Qin Ruoying smiled and turned to look at Xianxia. Xianxia looked at his wife helplessly. Then, he grabbed a black pill from the plate of sunflower seeds in front of the big cat. The big cat was lying lazily on the bar counter. When it saw that one of its snacks was taken away, it immediately stuck its head out and let out a dissatisfied meow. Xianxia stroked its head, then smiled at Xiao Yuan and said, "This is a pill left behind by an old Chinese doctor. I heard that it's especially helpful for kidney diseases. You can take this pill back to your father and see if it has any effect. Don't worry, it's a pure Chinese medicine formula. Even if it doesn't have any effect, there definitely won't be any side effects." Xiao Yuan took the pill skeptically. After glancing at it, she wrapped the pill in a tissue and said to Xianxia solemnly, "Thank you, boss. Go come, Nian Nian, say goodbye to your sister." "Goodbye, sister." Hearing this, the little girl immediately stood on Xianxia's lap and stuck her head out from behind the bar counter. She smiled and waved goodbye to Xiao Yuan. Goodbye, Nian. Sister will come to see you later. Xiao Yuan turned and left with a complicated expression. After leaving the tea house, she couldn't help but look back at the signboard with the words, Qingyi Tea House, written on it. Then, as if she had finally made up her mind, she quickly walked towards the bar. The weather wasn't very good today. It was always gray. Although it wasn't hazy yet, there wasn't even a bit of sunlight in the cold weather. There was no way to cheer people up. After the little episode just now, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Perhaps she had been infected by the big cat. The little girl sat on Xianxi's lap and lazily put her chin on the bar counter. She constantly blew with her small mouth, trying to blow a tissue into the air. Xianxi wanted to take her out for a walk, but the little girl pouted and shook her head. It looked like she didn't want to move at all. The TV in the tea house didn't have a broadcasting function, so she couldn't order cartoons. Since she couldn't watch cartoons, she wanted to serve tea to the customers. There weren't many customers, so the little girl was bored to death. Qin Ruing saw this and smiled gently. Nian, Mommy will tell you a story, okay? Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Mommy's stories were better than Daddy's stories. So she immediately climbed from Xi's lap to Qin Ruing's lap. Then she shook Qin Ruing's arm and smiled. Mommy, tell me. Okay, sit down first. Mommy will tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a temple on the mountain. Qin Ruing told the little girl the story of the 3 monks. But before the story was half finished, the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. Seeing this, Xianxi interrupted Qin Ruing's story and said directly to the little girl, Nian, look, there are guests. Guests? After a few days of getting used to it, the little girl had become familiar with the reception work of the tea house. So when she heard that there were guests, she was so excited that she wanted to jump out of Qin Ruing's arms. Qin Ruing was afraid that she would jump and fall, so she had to put her down carefully. The little girl seemed to be very enthusiastic about greeting guests. So when she stepped on the ground, she ran out from behind the bar counter. However, when the little girl ran out of the bar counter and saw the guests, she couldn't help but be stunned. Immediately after, she ran back to the bar counter and hid. Seeing this, Xianxi picked her up and carried her out of the bar counter. Hello, please take a seat. The person who came was an old man. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had 2 children who were about the same age as Nian. The 2 children looked exactly the same, and they were dressed exactly the same. They looked like they were carved out of the same mold. Twins. It was the first time that other children had appeared in the tea house, and they were a pair. The little girl had never seen twins before, so she was scared and ran back. After hearing Xi's words, the old man took the twins and sat in the seat where Xiao Yuan had sat before. After carrying the little girl to the old man's side, Xianxi asked with a smile, What would you like to drink, sir? The old man didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the little girl in Xi's arms with interest. The little girl seemed to be a little shy. She lay on Xi's shoulder and didn't dare to turn her head. This is your daughter? Yes. How old is she? 4.5 years old. Hearing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh. Then he pointed at the twins who were squeezed on the sofa and said, What a coincidence, these 2 children are also 4.5 years old. It is a bit of a coincidence. As he spoke, Xianxi put the little girl on the ground. Then he held her hand and said to her, Nian, come and say hello to Grandpa. The little girl hesitated for a moment. Then with Xianxi's encouragement, she said very politely to the old man, Hello, Grandpa. Chapter 144. Twins. According to statistics, the average birth rate of twins in the world was 89.1. In other words, out of every 89 pregnant women, there would be one who would give birth to twins. Before the 2-child policy was introduced, the number of births per day in Wuxia was around 20,800. If it was accurate to the second, then Wuxia would give birth to a baby every 4.15 seconds. Even with a 1% probability, Wuxia would give birth to 2,000 pairs of twins per day. After the 2-child policy was introduced, this number would double. Twins were not a particularly rare existence. However, the little girl was too young, so when she saw 2 children who looked exactly the same, she was immediately frightened. After she obediently greeted her grandfather, The little girl immediately shrank behind Xianxia, then carefully looked at the twins in front of her. The twins were both boys. They had delicate features and were very cute. Twins generally looked very similar because they were identical twins, so the genes they carried were almost the same. A small number of twins did not look alike, but that was because they were heterozygotic twins. If the mother laid 2 eggs and produced 2 fertilized eggs, then the genes they carried would naturally be different. When they grew up, there would be a clear difference. The twins did look very similar, and the children were still young, so even with Xianxi's eyesight, he could only find a few subtle differences. Seeing that the little girl was a little scared, Xianxia picked her up, then smiled at the old man and said, "The children look so similar, how do you usually tell them apart?" Hearing this, the old man laughed and said, "The older brother has a mole behind his earlobe, but the younger brother doesn't, but it's not obvious, so I made a mark on their clothes." After that, the old man asked the 2 children to turn around. Hearing their grandfather's words, the twins obediently turned around and lay on the sofa. At this time, Xianxia realized that there were numbers written on the back of their clothes. On the left was 1, and on the right was 2. Didn't the 18th National Assembly propose to talk about civilization? So I named the children Civilization. The left is the older brother, and the right is the younger brother, Xia Wen, Xia Ming. Civilization? Xianxia pondered for a moment, then said to the little fellow with a smile, "Come on, Nian Nian, introduce yourself to Grandpa." The little guy hugged Xianxi's neck with one hand and tilted his head to look at the twins. After that, he quickly turned his head and buried his little head in Xianxi's shoulder. Seeing her like an ostrich, Xianxia could only say to the old man apologetically, "Sorry, the child is shy. It's okay. My 2 kids used to be afraid of strangers too. I've gotten used to bringing them out for a stroll." After chatting with the old man for a while, Xianxia suddenly remembered his duty, so he quickly pointed to the price list on the table and said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Vegetarian tea. I have something to do later, so I'll leave after sitting for a while." "All right, please wait a moment." Xianxia returned to the bar with the little fellow in his arms. Qin Ruing also noticed the little fellow's strange behavior, so she quickly asked, "What's wrong?" She probably hasn't seen twins before, so she's scared. While talking, Xianxia handed the little fellow to Qin Ruing. Hearing this, Qin Ruing had to take the little fellow from Xianxi's hands, and then explain to her what twins were. At this time, Xianxia made a cup of tea for the old man. The waiters were on strike, so only he, the boss, had to do it personally. The little fellow rarely dealt with people of the same age. Now there were 2 of them, and they looked exactly the same, so naturally she was scared. After listening to Qin Ruing's explanation, the little fellow nodded as if he understood something. Tilting her head and thinking for a while, she suddenly pouted and asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a sister who looks exactly the same?" Qin Ruing was amused by her, so she pinched the tip of her little nose and asked, "You want a sister?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded, then said with anticipation, "I want a sister. A sister can play with me." You only know how to play." In fact, Qin Ruing had already guessed why she wanted a sister. It was because she was lonely, and there was no one of the same age to play with her. She had no plans to have a second child for the time being, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire, so the best way now was to bring the little fellow out to interact with people of the same age. Thinking of this, Qin Ruing carried the little fellow, then walked directly to the twins. Xianxia placed the teacup in front of the old man, and was about to turn back to the bar when Qin Ruing brought the little fellow over. The husband and wife had a tacit understanding, and Xianxia understood her meaning without a word of explanation. Thus, after Xianxi's introduction, the old man also understood the purpose of Qin Ruing's visit. Every parent hoped that their children would be able to play with their peers because for children under the age of 6, this was something that would only be beneficial and not detrimental. Seeing that the old man agreed, Qin Ruing did not stand on ceremony, and directly brought the little fellow to the twins, then smiled at the 2 children and asked, "Can you let your sister play with you?" After hearing her words, the older brother sitting on the left heard her, and without discussing with his younger brother, he immediately said, "Okay." Then he looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, can we play marbles with our sister?" "Go, don't bully her." "No. We won't bully her, we want to protect her." The older brother jumped down from the sofa excitedly, patted his chest, and promised. He directly took the little fellow's hand, like a little adult, and said to the little fellow, "Sister, I'll play with you." "Me too." The younger brother seemed to be afraid that they would miss him, so he immediately squeezed from behind the older brother. Looking at the younger brother, it seemed that he also wanted to hold the little fellow. Thus, Qin Ruing handed the little fellow's left hand to him. The two brothers were actually more than 2 months older than the little fellow. When the three of them stood together, they were half a head taller than the little fellow. The two brothers took Nian Nian around the hall. After finding an open space in the corner, they immediately squatted on the ground and took out marbles from their pockets. The little fellow had not played with glass marbles yet. Therefore, when she saw the colorful glass marbles, she was immediately attracted by the glass ball with a strange pattern in the middle. The little fellow grabbed a marble and played with it. Seeing this, the older brother immediately said to her, "Sister, we'll teach you how to play." Okay. Children could always play together happily. Qin Ruing stood beside the three little fellows with a smile, quietly watching them play marbles. The little fellow had not played with people of the same age for a long time, so in the beginning, she was a little reserved. But after playing for a while, the little fellow gradually let go of herself, and the range of her movements and laughter became louder and louder. Chapter 145. Playing marbles was actually a very fair competitive game, and it was very helpful for children to learn physics in the future. For example, when they learned about parabola, momentum, force, and other subjects, they could not help but think of playing marbles as a child. This also made it easier for children to understand the content of the teacher's lecture. The little girl had never played this kind of game in her life, so she was immediately excited. The twins were already veterans at this game. When they saw that their sister did not know how to play, they let her play. The little girl played 3 times, but they only played once. Qin Ruing accompanied the children, and Xianxia accompanied the old man to play Go. However, halfway through the game, the old man's phone suddenly rang. The old man took out his phone and looked at it. His face suddenly sank. After picking up the phone, the old man did not wait for the person on the other end of the phone to speak first. He said directly into the phone, "I'm here, don't rush me." After that, he seemed very impatient and hung up the phone. When Xianxia saw this, he smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Sai, some family matters. I have to go. I lost this game. Let's come back another day." The old man shook his head and said. After a gentle sigh, he stood up reluctantly and asked casually, "How much is this tea? You've been sitting here for less than half an hour, and you haven't drunk much tea. You don't have to pay. This bill is on me." Since Xianxia said so, the old man didn't hold back. After thanking Xianxia, he told his 2 grandsons that it was time to leave. When the twins heard their grandfather's call, they were stunned for a moment. They could not help but mutter, "So fast." They seemed to know that they had something to do later, so they reluctantly said to the little girl, "Sister, we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow to play with you." While talking, the 2 brothers also picked up the marbles on the ground. When the little girl saw this, her face was full of reluctance. However, there was no other way. They had to leave, so she had to silently help the 2 brothers pick up the marbles. "That green one is mine." When the younger brother saw that his marble was taken away, he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He pounced and snatched the green marble back from his older brother's hand. The little fellow squatted on the ground and silently watched them pick their marbles. She had a pitiful look on her face, as if she was very reluctant to let the 2 brothers leave. The 2 brothers put away the marbles and stood up. At this time, the elder brother seemed to have noticed the little fellow's abnormality. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose something in his pocket. After a while, the elder brother took out 2 marbles from his pocket and handed them to the little girl. "Sister, these 2 are for you." The little guy was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at his brother before hesitantly taking the marble from his hand. "And mine. I'll give you 2 as well." The younger brother was never willing to fall behind his older brother. After seeing his older brother give the marbles to the little guy, he also quickly grabbed 2 marbles and stuffed them into the little guy's hands. However, after giving away the marbles, the younger brother regretted it. Because the 2 marbles that his older brother gave were carefully selected with the ugliest patterns, but he gave the 2 prettiest ones. Although he felt a little heartache, the younger brother was still a man after all. So he knew that since he had given it away, He couldn't go back on his words. Thus, he stood together with his older brother and waved goodbye to the little guy. "Goodbye, sister. I'll come and play with you in the future. And me. I'll come and play with you too." The two brothers fought to be the first to say goodbye to the little guy. Seeing this, the little girl also stood up and waved her small hand that was holding the marbles at them. "Goodbye." The twins left. The little guy stood on the spot and lowered his head to look at the marbles in his hands. No one knew what he was thinking about. Qin Ruiying waited quietly for a while before lightly walking over. He squatted beside the little guy and pulled him into his arms. "Nian Nian, your brothers gave you something. Did you say thank you to them?" Hearing this, the little guy immediately used his little hands to hug Qin Ruiying's neck. After thinking for a while, she then asked in anticipation beside Qin Ruiying's ear, "Mama, when will my brothers come and play with me again?" Qin Ruiying smiled and didn't answer immediately. She carried the little guy to Chen Shi's side. Chen Shi took the little guy and used his hand to scratch the tip of her little nose. He then smiled and said to her, "Your brothers will come again tomorrow and play with you again. Are you happy?" "Happy." Hearing Chen Shi's words, the little guy finally broke into a smile and happily played with the marbles. Seeing this, the husband and wife both laughed. Twins were really much more fortunate than only children. The next morning, the little guy seemed to still be thinking about the two little brothers who looked exactly the same yesterday. So just after drinking a mouthful of pumpkin porridge, she couldn't wait to shout that she wanted to go to the tea house. "Nian Nian, don't be anxious. Finish your breakfast first. It's still early now. They won't come even if you go." Qin Ruiying served the little guy breakfast while Chen Shi tidied up the room. After the family of three finished breakfast and were about to leave for the tea house, the door of the east wing suddenly opened. Qin Xueqing actually went out. She had just walked out of the door when she saw the family of three standing on the steps of the west wing, staring straight at her. Stunned for a moment, Qin Xueqing asked awkwardly, "What's wrong?" "Oh, did the sun rise from the west today?" Chen Shi said as he pretended to look at the sky. Qin Xueqing heard him say this and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. During this period of time, she and Qin Yongyan hid in the room all day to cultivate. They didn't even eat on time. Luckily, Chen Shi left food for them every day. Cultivate, eat and sleep. They only did these three things every day. They were simply lazy. Qin Ruiying knew his sister's character very well. He was afraid that Chen Shi's joke would make her angry again, so he asked with a smile, "Are you going out?" "Yes, I just received a call from the leader. There's something I need to deal with." "Then be careful. If there's a problem, you can call us." Hearing this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Ruiying, then quickly glanced at Chen Shi. Then she nodded slightly hesitantly and said, "Okay, then I'll go first." "Go ahead." After Qin Xueqing quickly walked out of the courtyard, Chen Shi looked at Qin Ruiying with a half smile. Seeing this, Qin Ruiying asked with a smile, "If Yueqing encounters any problems as her brother-in-law, will you help?" Of course I'll help." After saying that, Chen Shi suddenly laughed, and then carried Qin Ruiying up by the waist. This sudden action immediately shocked Qin Ruiying. She quickly patted his arm and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Put me down. Let's go. Lady boss, let's open for business." Chen Shi carried Qin Ruiying by the waist, Qin Ruiying carried the little fellow, and the little fellow carried the big cat. Chapter 146. The business of the tea house was not good today, and there were no customers in the morning. The little fellow was lying on the bar, playing with the marbles that the brothers gave her. It was really boring to play marbles alone. After playing for a while, the little fellow felt a little bored, so she looked up and kept asking Chen Shi when the two little brothers from yesterday would come. The old man just said that they would come, but Chen Shi did not know when they would come. Seeing that the little fellow was about to explode, the couple thought about it, and simply took her to the corner yesterday, and then squatted on the ground to play marbles with her. 4 marbles, a family of 3. Seeing that her parents were willing to play with her, the little fellow immediately became happy. Playing marbles was actually very similar to playing billiards, and they both required certain skills. Chen Shi playing marbles was no different from opening a plug-in. In order to let the little fellow play to her heart's content, he had to deliberately miss every time. The little fellow learned the professional posture that the twins taught her, and after a tireless effort, she finally hit Xianxi's marbles. Papa! I won! I won! After grabbing the marbles in front of Xianxi, the little fellow excitedly giggled at Xianxi. Nian is so good. Do you still want to play? Yes. As if afraid that her father would not play with her, the little fellow quickly handed the marbles to Xianxi. Xianxi took the marbles, put them back on the ground, and then said to her with a smile, Nian, Papa doesn't know how to play, you have to give in to Papa a little. Okay. I will give in to Papa. The little fellow nodded again and again like a chicken pecking rice. But after restarting the game, her luck was off the charts, so she hit Xianxi's marble right away. Oh Nian, you are getting better and better. Papa is so stupid. I won again. The couple squatted beside the little fellow, looking at their daughter's flushed face because of too much excitement. They could not help but reach out and pinch her little face. Annoying. Papa is annoying. Mama is so annoying. The little fellow twisted her body to avoid the attack, which made Xianxi and Qin Ruiying laugh out loud. With the company of his parents, the boring morning passed quickly. The three of them had just finished lunch when the door of the tea house was pushed open. The old man came as promised. Traveling with him was naturally the twin brother that the little fellow had been looking forward to for a long time. After the short interaction yesterday, the three little guys had cultivated a deep enough friendship. So when the two brothers walked into the tea house, they immediately looked around for the little fellow. Sister, we're here. After seeing the little fellow, the two brothers hurriedly ran out and surrounded her. Then, as if he was presenting a treasure, the elder brother took out a small ka from his pocket and said to the little fellow, Sister, look! I brought you something good. After he finished speaking, he laid on the ground and slowly pulled the trolley back. When he let go of his hand, the cart immediately moved forward. The little fellow had never played with this kind of toy before, so she immediately ran over and picked up the cart from the ground to study it. Seeing this, the younger brother grabbed the cart from the little fellow's hand and stuffed his kaleidoscope into the little fellow's hand. Sister, look at this. This is fun. Seeing this, the elder brother immediately became unhappy. He quickly grabbed the cart back from his younger brother and said to him with dissatisfaction, My cart is fun. As he spoke, he wanted to put the cart back into the little fellow's hand. Seeing this, the younger brother was not to be outdone and shouted to his elder brother, The kaleidoscope is fun. The cart is fun. The kaleidoscope is fun. The little fellow held the kaleidoscope in one hand and the cart in the other. She foolishly watched the two brothers quarrel in front of her. Looking at the situation, if they were allowed to quarrel a few more words, they would probably fight. Qin Ruiying had no choice but to step forward to stop them, and then said to the little fellow, Nian, don't you want to play marbles? Let your elder brothers play with you. With Qin Ruiying's mediation, the two brothers put down their dispute, squatted on the ground with the little fellow, and played the marbles that they didn't enjoy yesterday. After she made a cup of tea for the old man. He played Go with him again. Because of the old man's face, she held back a few moves, and finally lost by 3 pieces. The old man won with difficulty, but because of this, he stopped looking down on him. He just wanted to play casually before, but he didn't expect that the tea house owner was really a master at such a young age. He actually had to use all his strength to win by chance. The two of them chatted while playing Go. Through chatting, they learned that the old man's surname was Gu, and he was already 65 years old this year. He lived in Binhai Alley, which was less than 200 meters away from Dongming Alley. The twins' surname was Xia, but the old man's surname was Gu. Obviously, he was their grandfather. She casually asked about the old man's family affairs, but he didn't expect the old man to shake his head after listening. He couldn't help but sigh, I don't want to talk about these things. Seeing this, she didn't ask more. The two of them continued to play Go. This game of Go was only interesting when the opponent was a match. If the opponent was too strong or too weak, it would be boring after 2 games. Xi's level was so much higher than the old man's that when he let the old man kill his dragon, the old man didn't notice anything strange. Instead, he proudly said that She was inexperienced. She nodded with a smile, and then invited the old man to play another game. Recently, it had been a bit gloomy. Although it didn't snow, the sun didn't come out much. Today was the worst day in history, but at the same time, it was also the happiest day for the little girl. The heater in the tea house was on full blast. Chen Shi and the old man played Go leisurely, while the three little guys were chattering non-stop. Qin Ruoying put on light music, then sat on the sofa next to them and quietly read a book. Perhaps they were tired from playing marbles, so the three little guys sat on the sofa to rest. Then, the older brother came up with a new trick. Flipping flower rope. The two brothers probably played it at home, so after Qin Ruoying helped them find a rope, the two brothers immediately showed it to the little girl. The older brother first tied the rope into a noose, then flipped out a square cross with his fingers. When the younger brother saw this, he immediately reached over. After flipping it a few times, the noose was in his hand. Then, a double cross pattern appeared on the younger brother's hand. At first, the little girl didn't think it was anything strange. But when she saw the younger brother casually flip and create a new pattern, her interest was finally aroused. The older brother was not to be outdone. After glancing at the double cross on the younger brother's hand, he put his thumb through it, and with a hook of his little finger, a mosquito net suddenly appeared from his hand. Amazing! The little girl stared with her eyes wide open. She didn't even dare to blink her eyes at their performance. So she immediately looked at the brothers and said with some expectation, "Can you teach me?" Hearing this, the older brother immediately took back his hand, took the rope, and handed it to the little girl. "Sister, come, I'll teach you." However, before the little girl reached out to take it, the younger brother suddenly snatched the rope from the older brother's hand, then held the rope and said to the little girl, "Sister, don't let him teach you. I'll teach you. Give it to me. I'll teach you. No. I'll teach you. I'll teach you. I'll teach you." Seeing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help shaking her head and laughing. Chapter 147. Gu Lao was a retired man, and his only job now was to take care of his grandchildren. The two brothers seemed to be very well behaved now, but in fact, they were much more naughty than Yan Yan. If the two brothers stayed in one place for a long time, there would probably be footprints on the ceiling. No matter where they went, the two brothers were together, so they were much bolder than the average child. If it weren't for the little girl in the tea house, they probably wouldn't have been able to sit still and would have clamored to go out and play. Gu Lao was in good health, but taking care of these two naughty boys usually tired him out. Today, it was rare that the two brothers didn't bother him, so Gu Lao was naturally happy to be free. The three of them sat in the tea house for the whole afternoon. Chen Shi patiently played Go with the old man. He controlled his level very well, and after a few games, his record became 2 wins and 3 losses. Such a well-matched match also thoroughly aroused the old man's competitive spirit, and he became more and more focused when playing Go. 4:20 in the afternoon. Not long after the 6th game started, Chen Shi's phone suddenly rang. He took out his phone and found that the caller was Ning Qiutong, who he hadn't contacted for a long time. Since Chen Shi hung up on Ning Zhonghua last time, the father and daughter of the Ning family didn't bother him again. Ning Qiutong's sudden call probably meant that she needed his help with something again. After thinking for a while, Chen Shi smiled apologetically at Gu Lao, and then picked up the phone. "Hello, Mr. Chen? It's me, Ning Qiutong." As soon as he picked up the phone, Chen Shi heard a little nervousness in Ning Qiutong's tone. The reason why Ning Zhonggua's attitude was so bad when he talked to him last time was because he couldn't find any clues about Yingying at that time, which caused him to be in a bad mood. Now that he found his wife, and the family lived happily together, Chen Shi naturally returned to his previous harmless appearance. Come to think of it, the father and daughter of the Ning family had helped him a lot in the past, although most of it was a combination of interests. However, they were sensible and knew when to advance and retreat, so Chen Shi didn't mind continuing to maintain a relationship with them. Thus he smiled and asked, "It's me. What's the matter?" After confirming that Chen Shi was not very resistant to her, Ning Qiutong immediately said excitedly, "Mr. Chen, can you save my father?" What happened to your father?" "He was kidnapped." "What happened?" "Dad didn't come home yesterday, and I couldn't get through to him on the phone. I thought he had something important to do, so I didn't look for him. I didn't expect to suddenly receive a call from the kidnappers this morning." "Did you call the police?" "Yes, the police are at my house right now." "Since you've already called the police, you should listen to the police. What's the use of telling me?" After saying this, Chen Shi seemed to feel that it wasn't very nice of him to say this, so he quickly added, "You're pretty rich, right? If you can't save him, then you can use the money to solve the problem. Save him first, You can earn the money later. Hearing this, Ning Qiutong said with a sobbing tone, the kidnappers don't want money, they only want the pills you gave Dad last time. Xianxia frowned slightly. Pills? Could it be the accomplices of the two Nanyang people last time? While Xianxia was still thinking, Ning Qiutong thought that Xianxia didn't want to, so she begged. Mr. Chen, Dad told me not to call you. Although the police have already started to act, I still feel very worried. I don't want to risk Dad's life, so I took the liberty to call you. I hope you don't mind. Okay, I understand. Hearing her terrified voice, Xianxia interrupted her and said directly, do you know where my house is? I still have a few pills left at home. They're on a plate under the coffee table in the living room. You can go and get them, but remember not to break the lock. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Thank you. That's it then. After saying this, Xianxia hung up the phone. At this time, Gu Lao looked at Xianxia with a slightly surprised look and asked directly, use the money to solve the problem? Your friend was kidnapped? Xianxia smiled and shook his head. He casually explained, a friend is in debt outside, and the loan sharks came looking for him. His family is worried, so they called me. Hearing this, Gu Lao also shook his head and said emotionally, why would a normal person deal with loan sharks? Your friend is probably not a decent person. I'll take advantage of my seniority to give you a piece of advice. It's better if you don't deal with this kind of people in the future. Otherwise, one day you might be involved. Xianxia nodded and said yes. After laughing, he did not continue the topic. Seeing this, Gu Lao did not say anything more. The two continued to play Go, and Xianxia thought about Ning Zhonggua's incident. He really didn't expect that a mere simplified version of the foundation elixir would actually involve so many things. After Ning Zhonggua and Su Wei were warned by him last time, they had promised that they would definitely minimize the impact of the pill. However, some fires were easy to ignite, but difficult to extinguish. After all, according to the rumors, it was a miracle pill that could change one's fate. Who wouldn't want it? Ning Zhonggua and Su Wei had shot themselves in the foot. Not only did they not make much money, but they also got into trouble because of it. Thinking about it, this was the second time Ning Zhonggua was kidnapped because of the pill. However, this time he was smart. After seeing the tip of the iceberg of Xianxia's strength, Ning Zhonggua had already made up his mind. No matter what, he would not say anything about Xianxia. Instead, he insisted that the hidden expert who could refine the miracle pill had already passed away. Ning Qiutong also knew about Xianxia's existence. However, because of Ning Zhonggua's warning, she hesitated for a long time before finally plucking up the courage to call Xianxia. The kidnappers only wanted the pill and not the money. However, there were no more pills. Could it be that she had to use a fake pill in exchange for her father's life? What if the other party saw through it? This was a serious matter. Ning Qiutong did not dare to take the risk, so she thought of looking for Xianxia. Fortunately, Xianxia was much easier to deal with compared to the kidnappers. After getting Xianxia's permission, Ning Qiutong hurriedly rushed to the Kongju district, ready to exchange the pill for Ning Zhonggua's life. It was just a simplified version of the energy pill. Xianxia could have as many as he wanted, so he did not care much. Old Ning's performance this time was not bad. Those few pills were his reward. As for the kidnappers, Xianxia was not the police. Why would he care so much? Ning Zhonggua was a famous business tycoon in Zhonghai. Since he was kidnapped, the Zhonghai police would naturally do their best to ensure his safety. Chapter 148. Gu Lao was a very particular person. For the past 2 days, he would take the twins to the tea house after lunch every day. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Gu Lao would refuse Xianxia's dinner invitation and then take the reluctant twins home for dinner. A cup of vegetarian tea a day was only 20 yuan. Xianxia didn't accept it, but he insisted on giving it. He always said that it was a different matter. On this day, when Gu Lao took the twins to the tea house again, he suddenly found that there was a children's playground in the tea house. It turned out that the couple saw that the 3 little guys would spend most of their time lying on the ground, so after some discussion, they simply removed the row of booths on the left side of the bar. The empty space was about 7 or 8 square meters. Xianxia first circled the area with a plastic fence, and then covered it with colorful children's climbing mats. The twins often brought some small toys for the little guy these 2 days, which opened the little guy's eyes, but also gave her the idea of wanting her parents to buy her toys. Xianxia suddenly realized that he had not bought any toys for Nian Nian since he came back for so long. So, he discussed with Qin Ruing to buy a lot of things in Jingdong. Within the third ring road of Shangjing, the Jingdong delivery would arrive the next morning. Xianxia bought a set of Barbie dolls for the little guy and 2 or 3 sets of accessories for her. Fantasy wardrobes, villas, castles, holiday homes, everything was available. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for music? A children's electronic organ was needed. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for painting? Children's paintbrushes, crayons, watercolors, and a painting kit were needed. Nian Nian lacked companionship, so a children's intelligent robot toy was needed. There was also a set of Lego bricks, puzzle toys, good stuff. The couple was addicted to buying. You choose one, I choose one. When Qin Ruing came back to her senses, the settlement price of the shopping cart had reached more than 8,000 yuan. This was not good. How many toys to buy for the child was a very particular thing. After research by scholars at the University of Virginia, they found that the best number of toys to buy for the child was 5. If there are less than 5 toys, children may feel inferior. But if there were more than 5, not only would the toys not be played enough, but it would also limit the child's creativity. It was also proven that the more toys there were at home, the lower the frequency of children playing with them. Too many toys would distract a child's attention, and it was easy for the child to develop the bad habit of 3-minute enthusiasm. On the other hand, if the number of toys was small, the child would get tired of playing with them. At the same time, if they couldn't get new toys, the bored child would create new ways to play. This was human nature, just like how primitive people created songs and dances out of boredom after eating and sleeping. Therefore, children who liked to study were often more intelligent. At the same time, because they had fewer toys, they were more focused. Of course, it was also wrong not to buy a toy for the child. All the other children had toys, but he didn't. While children envied others, they would also develop feelings of inferiority, which would seriously affect the child's mental health. The number of 5 toys was not an absolute standard. After all, every child was different, so the real effective standard still needed the parents to observe and figure it out. After Qin Ruoying's reminder, Xianxia had to sift through the shopping cart regretfully. In the end, there were only Barbie dolls, Lego bricks, and an electronic piano left. When the twins came to the tea house, the little girl was lying in the children's playground, piling up Lego bricks. Because of the new toys, she didn't ask for a brother today. When the brothers saw the children's playground that Xianxia had carefully decorated, they immediately ran to the fence and said to the little girl with envy, "Sister, can we come in and play?" "Okay. But Mommy said that we have to take off our shoes when we come in to play." "Okay. We'll take it off." Hearing this, the brothers quickly kicked off the shoes on their feet and couldn't wait to open the fence door. After getting in, they directly lay next to the little girl and played with her with Lego bricks. The 3 little guys made a lot of noise in the tea house, so Qin Ruoying played light music to cover up their chattering noise. Recently, the tea house's business had been declining day by day. It was probably directly related to these 3 little guys. If this trend continued, it was estimated that the tea house would become a children's playground sooner or later. Qin Ruoying sat at the bar, reading a book and drinking tea. The giggles of the 3 little guys from time to time made her smile faintly. Looking up at her lover who was playing chess with Gu Lao, Qin Ruoying felt like she was in a dream. Wasn't this kind of peaceful and comfortable life what she had always dreamed of? Qin Ruoying sat behind the bar in a daze, her face full of happiness. But at this moment, a melodious ringtone suddenly rang out. It was her cell phone that was ringing. She got this cell phone after returning to Shangjing. Only the 3 of them in her family knew her number. Qin Ruoying quickly picked it up and took a look. Sure enough, the caller was Qin Yongyan. The call was connected. But the first sentence from Qin Yongyan shocked Qin Ruoying. "Yingying, Qingqing is injured." What happened to her? It said that she was ambushed and shot in the arm with a sniper rifle. If she didn't dodge quickly, she would be a dead person now. But even so, one of her hands is considered disabled. Qin Ruoying was stunned. Holding the cell phone, she froze in place. At this time, after Xianxia excused himself from Gu Lao, he got up and went to the bar. He had already heard the conversation between the father and daughter. He patted Qin Ruoying's back gently, indicating that she should not worry. Chen Shi took the phone from Qin Ruing and asked Qin Yongyan, "Where is she now?" "In Jianghu." "I'll be right there." Okay. Hearing Chen Shi's words, Qin Yongyan immediately felt relieved. After telling Chen Shi the specific location, he hung up the phone. Chen Shi was very clear about his sister-in-law's strength. When she left a few days ago, she had successfully broken through the Alcade state. But unexpectedly, she was lucky enough to survive because of this. The reason why martial arts declined was that human society had completely entered the era of firearms. Even a child as old as Nian Nian could easily kill a martial arts master who had practiced martial arts for many years with a gun. The bullet speed of a sniper rifle was generally about 900 meters per second, and the speed of sound was only 340 meters per second. This speed was 5 times faster than the speed of sound. If Qin Wanqing was still in the transforming strength stage, she wouldn't have been able to dodge this fatal shot. She was indeed lucky. Chapter 149. Something had happened to Qin Xueqing. But it was Qin Yongyan who had called to inform them. In other words, Qin Xueqing was probably not out of danger yet. Qin Ruing only had one sister. Although Qin Xueqing especially liked to compete with her when she was young, it was just a childish tantrum. It was obviously impossible to say that the two sisters had no feelings for each other. Qin Xueqing actually cared about her sister very much, just like how Qin Ruing cared about her. It was just that she always appeared cold and aloof. Qin Ruing was not very sure what would happen if she was shot in the arm by a sniper rifle. But Qin Yongyan had already said on the phone that one of Qingqing's hands was crippled. She was originally a martial arts fanatic. If one of her hands was really crippled, what kind of blow would it be to her? The more Qin Ruing thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but hold Chen Shi's hand tightly, looking a little frightened. Seeing this, Chen Shi gently hugged her into his arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruing gently leaned her head on Chen Shi's chest. After adjusting her emotions, she said softly, "Shi, go and see Qingqing." "Okay." Chen Shi nodded, then lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruing's lips. Perhaps because Chen Shi was by her side, Qin Ruing could not help but feel a little more relaxed after their lips parted. The couple turned their heads to the left side of the bar. The three little guys were sitting on the climbing mat, with a pile of Lego blocks in front of each of them. They were comparing whose block castle looked better. "Nian Nian, Daddy has to go out for a while. I'll be back soon. Be good at home and listen to Mommy. Okay?" Chen Shi's tone was full of negotiation because he was worried that the little guy would suddenly flip out, however. The little fellow's reaction was somewhat out of Chen Shi's expectations. She looked up at Chen Shi. After thinking for a while, the little girl suddenly grinned and said, "Goodbye, Papa. I'll wait for you at home." As she spoke, she waved her hand at Chen Shi. At this moment, the twins waved at Chen Shi and shouted, "Goodbye, Uncle." Seeing this, Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. Then, he patted the heads of the three little guys one by one. The little fellow suddenly stopped clinging to him. It probably had something to do with these two brothers. Chen Shi didn't know that the two brothers were brought up by Gu Lao. Their parents were very busy with work, so they rarely accompanied them when they were young. After the brothers explained their situation to the little fellow finally understood how happy she was now. Therefore, when Chen Shi proposed to go out, Nian Nian was very generous. Because she now understood that adults need to go out to work, so they can't be with their children all day. The little fellow was very generous, which relieved Chen Shi of his worries. After briefly explaining the situation to Gu Lao, Qin Ruing followed Chen Shi to the courtyard behind the tea house. "I'm here, don't worry." "Well, after you understand the situation, remember to give me a call." "Okay." Chen Shi reached out and gently touched Qin Ruing's face. After taking her into his arms and kissing her again, he smiled and said, "Let's go." Then, under Qin Ruing's gaze, Chen Shi disappeared in the air in an instant. After sighing softly, Qin Ruing turned and returned to the tea house. Spring City. What was Spring City? There was no cold in winter, no hot in summer, and spring all year round. Spring City was the provincial capital of Jianghu. It was one of the important central cities in the western region of Wuxia. At the same time, it was also the gateway city to Southeast Asia and South Asia. Spring City was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and Jianghu Lake on the south. Because it was located in a low-latitude plateau, it formed a unique climate of spring all year round. Especially with the plateau lake Jianghu Lake regulating the temperature and humidity, the annual average temperature here was always maintained around 16.5 degrees Celsius. The air was really fresh and the climate was pleasant. As a second-tier city, Spring City was naturally not as prosperous as Vonghai or as grand as Shangjing. But there was one thing that Spring City was better than these two cities. That was, there was no smog. Of course, the high altitude in exchange for spring all year round came at the price of low humidity. After living for a long time, people's skin would become very dry. But for people with rheumatoid diseases, this was simply a holy land for health. Rong City Military District, Spring City General Hospital. Senior Officials Ward. The senior officials ward here was not as high-end as the 301 hospital in Shangjing, but it had the advantage of having a high floor and a good environment. There were wardrobes, fridges, washrooms, and bathrooms. The area was not big, but it had everything. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Xueqing was still in shock. As a newly promoted martial arts grandmaster, her physique was indeed better than ordinary people. After the heavy sniper rifle locked on, she could still sense the danger and dodge in time while being restrained by others. However, although she dodged the fatal shot, her entire right hand was disabled because of it. Because of the appearance of various supernatural dramas in recent years, many people mistakenly thought that after being shot in the head by a sniper rifle, it would only leave a small hole in the forehead. But in reality, if someone was really shot in the head by a sniper rifle, their head would explode like a big watermelon, and they would become a headless corpse in an instant. The so-called heavy sniper rifle was actually a 50 anti-material sniper rifle. The main targets of this type of rifle were armored vehicles, airplanes, and fortifications. Its advantages were its long range, high power, and high accuracy. Its disadvantages were that there was usually only one bullet in the magazine, and it took a long time to reload. If one was directly hit by this type of rifle, if one was lucky, it might only break in two. But if one was unlucky, it might be all over the place. There was no way to collect the corpse. Qin Xueqing's arm was broken on the spot. Fortunately, she was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, when her entire arm was broken, her shoulder blade might be pulled and a part of her body would be forcibly torn off. This was the true power of modern weapons. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Xueqing was still in a coma. A group of people stood outside her ward. They had been waiting here for a whole day and night, but Qin Xueqing still did not wake up. A man who looked to be in his 30s stood up and glanced at Qin Wanqing, who was lying on the hospital bed through the glass window. He seemed to have made a decision as he turned around and walked out with an ashen face. "Third brother. Stop. Where are you going?" Before the man called third brother could take 2 steps, he was pulled back by his companion behind him. He did not say a word and wanted to shake off his companion, but his companion grabbed his arm tightly and did not allow him to leave. The two of them started arguing. The people around them hurriedly surrounded them and tried to persuade them to calm down. While they were arguing, the elevator door opened with a ding sound. A man slowly walked out of the elevator. He stood in the corridor and looked around. After confirming the room number, he walked directly to the senior officials' ward where they were. Third brother was in a fit of anger. When he saw that the man was being so rude, he immediately reached out his hand to stop him. "Stop. Who the F*** are you? Do you know where this place is?" The man glanced at him, then pointed to the ward behind him and asked, "Is Qin Xueqing here?" "Who the F*** are you?" Third brother's attitude was very bad, so the man did not want to talk to him. After glancing at him indifferently, he wanted to walk past him and go straight to the ward. Third brother was instantly furious. He reached out his hand to drag the man back. However, before his hand could touch the man's clothes, a huge force slammed him against the wall. Chapter 150. Brother-in-law? The people outside the ward could not help but look at each other when they heard this. After saying that, Xianxia didn't bother to pay attention to them anymore. She walked past them and entered the ward. No one dared to stop him. This was because Lao San had been slapped into the wall by him. Just this move alone was enough to intimidate them. Everyone knew their stuff because they knew Lao San's martial arts level very well. He was at the peak of covert strength. He could send a warrior at the peak of covert strength flying with a casual slap. This young man in front of them was at least a Wu Dao Supreme Master. The few people outside the ward pondered over his self-revealing identity for a while, and were skeptical about it for the time being. However, Lao San did not believe it. After Xianxia pushed him back, Lao San immediately took out a pistol from his waist and roared at the others with a red face. F***CK, you don't even know who this person is. How dare you let him in? After that, he rushed into the ward aggressively with a gun. In the ward, Qin Xueqing was lying on the bed with a pale face. Seeing his proud sister-in-law suddenly lying on the bed, Xianxia could not help but frown slightly. Just as he was about to approach the bed, Lao San rushed in with a gun. Stop right there. Raise. Get out. Before he could finish his words, Xianxia had already turned sideways and glared at him. Then he spat out a word coldly. Before Qin Xueqing reached the gang state, she could only let Xianxia do whatever he wanted to her, let alone Lao San, who had not even reached the peak strength stage. Therefore, Xianxia did not do anything. Lao San's chest suddenly felt like he was hit by a hammer. His whole body immediately flew out. Xianxia did not hurt him. After he flew out of the ward, he closed the door behind him. Lao San's companions outside the door quickly caught him and prevented him from falling to the ground. Seeing this, the companion who had just argued with Old Third could not help but blurt out, "Using qi to control objects, a great grandmaster in the gang state." Hearing this, the expressions of the people outside the door changed drastically. Gang state? So young. Is he really the brother-in-law of the section chief? That should be it. He looks a few years younger than me. I didn't expect him to already be a great grandmaster. A great grandmaster in the gang state was a legendary existence for people who had been practicing martial arts since childhood. Qin Xueqing had just broken through to the Alcade state and had not had time to stabilize her state, so she did not tell them that she had already stepped into the Alcade state. Old Third finally calmed down a lot after being hit by such a heavy blow. When he stood up again with the help of his companions, he didn't try to chase them away. Instead, he squeezed to the glass window and looked at the situation in the room. This was the Chengdu Military Region's Spring City General Hospital. No matter how bold those Nanyang monkeys were, it was unlikely that they would come here to cause trouble. The reason why OL3 stopped Xianxia from entering was because he was in a bad mood. He wanted to vent his anger on someone, but he did not expect to bump into an iron plate. At this time, Xianxia was already standing next to Qin Xueqing. He lifted a corner of Qin Xueqing's blanket and looked at her empty sleeve with a frown. Then, he gently placed his right hand on Qin Xueqing's forehead. 3 seconds later, Xianxia slowly withdrew his right hand, and Qin Xueqing slowly woke up. The section chief is awake. Damn. That's awesome. Let's go in and have a look. They pushed and shoved outside the door, but they found that they could not get in. The door seemed to be locked from the inside. Qin Xueqing's head shook left and right, followed by a painful groan. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Perhaps it was because the light was too dazzling, so Qin Xueqing frowned and took a while to adjust to it. Then she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she was a great master in the gang state, and her body was much stronger than ordinary people. After a short period of adjustment, Qin Xueqing used her left hand to support herself to sit up. The ward was filled with the faint smell of disinfectant. This was the 13th floor, and the bright morning sun shone into the room through the window. In a trance, Qin Xueqing vaguely remembered that she had a very long dream. That dream was too long. So when she woke up, she felt as if she had gone from a cold winter full of snow to a warm spring full of the fragrance of flowers. Sensing that there was someone beside her, Qin Xueqing turned to look at the figure and was slightly stunned. After a long while, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Why are you here? Where is this?" Spring City. Military Hospital. Hospital. Qin Xueqing muttered. Immediately after, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly turned her head to look at her right arm. Sure enough, the empty sleeve was swaying slightly. The memory before she fainted flashed in her mind like a slideshow. She remembered. She, who had already stepped into the gang state, was like a real god in front of those Nanyang monkeys, and they were forced to retreat. She even remembered the despair on those Nanyang people's faces. The leader of those Nanyang people was also a martial arts master. When she fought with them, They pretended to be defeated and lured her to chase after them. As a martial artist, Qin Shueqing had her own confidence and pride. So she subconsciously thought that every martial arts master should have their own pride. She really didn't expect that the other party had already arranged a sniper and was just waiting for her to take the bait. Qin Shueqing's hard work during this period of time was not wasted. Although she didn't teach her any spells, after being shot, she still relied on her instincts and decisively released all of the true essence in her body to force the enemy back. She also fought for a chance of survival for herself, holding on until reinforcements arrived. She survived, and her broken arm was brought back by her companions. But unfortunately, she was shot in the upper arm, and the bullet immediately turned her upper arm into minced meat. With this degree of injury, there was no way to perform a limb replantation surgery, so the doctor could only amputate her arm. Now that she lost her right arm, she was considered a disabled person, right? Not to mention that she was also a martial arts master. Even if an ordinary person suddenly became disabled, they probably wouldn't be able to accept this fact in a short period of time. A one-armed knife. That was a scene that only appeared in movies and TV series. If a martial artist didn't even have a complete body, how could they talk about martial arts? Although she could defeat a normal neutralizing master with one hand, what if the other party was in the same realm as her? Thinking of this, Qin Shueqing's face couldn't help but darken. She seemed to have lost her luster. Because she had lost too much blood, her face was a little pale, and her lips were slightly chapped. It seemed that she didn't want Chen Shi to see her weak and helpless appearance. After a trace of pain flashed across Qin Shueqing's face, she acted as usual and said coldly, "You go back first. I want to rest for a while." After saying this, she lay back on the bed. Chen Shi stood to her left. After lying down, she found that Chen Shi was still looking at her, so she turned to her right. Her right arm was already missing. With her body pressed down, the wound suddenly burst open, and blood instantly seeped out of the gauze. Qin Shueqing let out a soft groan. Then, she used her left hand to grab the quilt and pull it up, covering her head with it. "I want to sleep. Please leave." Qin Shueqing hid under the quilt and said in a muffled voice. But at the same time, 2 streams of hot tears quietly fell from his eyes. She turned sideways, stretched her head forward, and tried to wipe the tears on her face with the quilt. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. She was Qin Shueqing, a martial arts great master who had stepped into the gang state before the age of 30. Chen Shi stood aside, quietly looking at his sister-in-law who was hiding under the quilt and quietly crying. He couldn't help but sigh slightly. After all, she was just a little woman. After sighing, Chen Shi made a new move. However, this move was a little rough. Because he directly lifted Qin Shueqing's quilt. Qin Shueqing was lying on the bed. It seemed that she didn't expect that Chen Shi would dare to lift her quilt, so she was stunned on the spot. After the quilt fell to the ground, Qin Shueqing came to her senses. "What are you doing? Are you trying to mock me? Or are you pitying me?" She sat up and roared at Chen Shi, but there was still a trace of tears on her face that hadn't dried yet. Chen Shi didn't say anything. The two of them looked at each other silently. Qin Shueqing didn't see sarcasm or pity in Chen Shi's eyes, but calmness. It was as calm as a lake deep in the mountains, without any emotion. Chen Shi saw despair and pain in Qin Shueqing's eyes. This broken arm made her finally understand what despair was. After a long time, Chen Shi finally broke the silence. Chapter 151. Kill. Qin Shueqing was stunned. Suddenly, she remembered the scene she saw in the village. It was this harmless-looking man in front of her, who used frost and snow as a sword and killed the legend of the village. Was he here to support her? Qin Shueqing stared blankly at Chen Shi. There were still traces of tears in the corners of her eyes. That pitiful look on her face made her look like a little woman who had just broken up with her boyfriend and was currently feeling extremely sad. Her weeping beauty and pitiful appearance gave Chen Shi a headache. After a slight cough, Chen Shi said in a low voice, "Let's go. I will avenge you." Qin Shueqing did not speak. She was stunned for a moment. Then, she suddenly curled up her legs. She sat on the bed and hugged her legs with her left hand. Then, she lowered her head and pressed it tightly against her knees. Qin Shueqing gritted her teeth and tried not to cry. However, Xianxi's 5 senses detected the slight trembling of her shoulders and the faint sound of her sobbing. The blow of losing an arm was too heavy for a woman like her who had always been confident and conceited. Blowing the mud up to the clouds, raising the flesh and bones of the dead. In this sentence, the words raise and flesh were both methods of using. If translated in plain language, it should be making the dead stand up, making the bones grow flesh. Coming back from the dead, and making the bones grow flesh. This was the method of immortals. Wasn't it just a broken arm? Even if she was broken into 2 pieces, Xianxia had a way to put her back together. However, after careful consideration, Xianxia did not intend to tell Qin Shueqing that he had a way to save her now. Because his character was indeed flawed. As the saying goes, kindness is like water. Those who are too strong break easily, and those who are soft will never be defeated. Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise, and a blessing may be a curse in disguise. With the experience of losing her hand this time, it was not necessarily a bad thing to let this proud daughter of heaven have a taste of bitterness and temper her. Qin Shueqing hugged her legs in pain silently. Xianxia was not in a hurry. He just stood silently by the bed and looked at her. After a while, Qin Shueqing gradually calmed down. She rested her head on her knees and carelessly rubbed it twice. Only then did she raise her head and look at Xianxia with red eyes. She asked, "Did Big Sister tell you to come?" This woman's logical thinking seemed to be jumping around a bit. Xianxia did not expect that she would ask such a question after crying for a while. Why did it sound like she was treating him as an outsider? If he asked himself honestly, he should have done a good job as a brother-in-law. After pondering for a moment, Xianxia nodded and said softly, "Uncle Qin and Ying are very worried about you, so I came to check on you first." "What about you?" Xianxia did not understand what she wanted to say. But at this time, Qin Shueqing had already turned her head and looked to the other side. She glanced at the closet next to her and then directly walked out of the bed. "You go out first. I want to change my clothes." "Okay, I'll wait for you outside." Seeing that she seemed to be much better, Xianxia did not waste any more time and directly walked out of the ward. Outside the ward, those people were still blocking the door and eavesdropping. When they saw Xianxia coming over, they scattered like birds and beasts. Xianxia opened the door. Those people were already sitting or standing in positions. There were a total of 4 men and 1 woman here. They were all Qin Shueqing's subordinates. What did Qin Shueqing do? She was a direct subordinate of the Wu Lian headquarters in Shangjing. She was the director of the Emergency Operations Management Office for Special Events. She was a section chief, so everyone called her Section Chief Qin. The Wu Lian was an administrative unit, so naturally, it used the administrative rank. Her position as a section chief did not seem high, but she had special rights. One of them was that it was not illegal to kill people. When the Wu Lian's department was on a mission in another country, they had the right to request the local police to cooperate with the operation. If the situation was special, they could even apply to the higher-ups for local armed police and military support. Qin Shueqing's Emergency Management Office had 10 action teams under its jurisdiction. With Shangjing as the center, they were responsible for combating all martial artist-related criminal activities in North China. This time, the reason why she came to Spring City was because of the special mission. It was a group of martial artists who illegally came from Nanyang. They planned a shocking kidnapping in Zhonghai, which shocked the entire international Wu Lian. Their timing was very clever. After most of the people in the Zhonghai branch were transferred to Jinling for another mission, they began the operation and directly kidnapped 2 well-known business moguls in Zhonghai. The social impact of this operation was too great. The Zhonghai branch did not have enough time to transfer people from Jinling, so they had to send an emergency request to the headquarters. After the headquarters in Shangjing received the request, they immediately sent out reinforcements. Qin Shueqing was one of the main people in charge of this rescue mission. After they set off from Shangjing and arrived in Zhonghai, they found that the group of Nanyang people had already gone deep into the hinterland of Wuxia. This group of people was also very brave. After they knew that the military would take over the sea and the air defense, they simply chose to travel by land. They crossed East China, Central China, and South China, planning to return to Nanyang from Guizhou. They had hostages in their hands. All of them were highly skilled in martial arts and were armed with heavy weapons. Due to various considerations, the local police did not dare to obstruct them. They set up checkpoints along the way, but they let them pass. From East China to the border of South China, it was more than 2,000 kilometers. This group of people only took 1 day and 1 night to complete the entire journey. This could already be considered a terrorist activity. In a fit of anger, the Wu Lian leader ordered the action team to set up layers of defense on the border of Guizhou with the Border Defense Army. Even if the hostages were hurt, it was absolutely impossible to let them leave Wuxia unscathed. Qin Shueqing led the team to intercept them in Guizhou. After a short exchange with that group of people, they retreated after one strike and turned to jump into Shirwan Mountains. Shirwan Mountains was located in the southern part of Guizhou. It faced the sea and was adjacent to Yue Bay. The mountains were filled with towering trees, and there were few roads and few people. Qin Shueqing originally thought that they would find an opportunity to cross the border from Shirwan Mountains and escape to Yue Bay, so she launched a search operation in Shirwan Mountains. She did not know that this group of people did not intend to leave through Shirwan Mountains at all. Instead, they turned again and went directly to Jianghu. With the obstruction of Shirwan Mountains, they successfully shook off the Border Defense Army. However, the weakest under Qin Shueqing's command was at the middle stage of concealing strength. How could she let them escape under her nose? Therefore, she immediately followed them and chased them all the way. Finally, on the border of Jianghu, Qin Shueqing stopped this group of people again. This time, the other party finally started a direct confrontation with them. Qin Shueqing did not dare to use heavy weapons, but the other party was not polite at all. They carried rocket launchers on their shoulders and only fired them in places where there were many people. They seemed to be escaping from the beginning to the end, but in fact, all of the Wu Lian's actions were within the expectations of this group of people. Their destination was Jianghu. After Qin Shueqing was injured, the emergency department suddenly lost its backbone. Without the obstruction of the martial arts masters, this group of people rushed across the border. Chapter 152. The atmosphere outside the ward was a little awkward. Lao San leaned against the wall and squatted on the ground. No one knew what he was thinking about. The others were curiously sizing up Chen Shi. Qin Shueqing had already woken up. It was not hard to tell from her reaction that this man was indeed related to her, so they could not be rude to him. Moreover, they dared not be rude to an Alcade Grandmaster. These people all had the usual arrogance of a martial artist. Perhaps it was because they rarely interacted with others, so although they felt a little awkward, none of them thought of standing up to talk to Chen Shi to ease the atmosphere a little. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not stay any longer. He turned and walked toward the elevator. Chen Shi didn't stop until she reached the corridor window directly across from the elevator. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. Even though he was a few streets away, he could still vaguely see the sparkling Dianqi Lake. Spring City was a second-tier city. In order to proactively develop, various policies had been tilted and construction sites were everywhere in the city. The city sped up its development, but it also lost some of its inexplicable charm. Qin Shueqing moved quickly. In less than 2 minutes, she had changed and walked out. Qin Shueqing was dressed casually. She wore a white knitted sweater under a brown windbreaker and a pair of light blue slim-fit jeans that showed off her perfect legs. She did not wear high heels. Instead, she wore a pair of white sneakers. Therefore, she looked like a little girl who had just graduated from university. When they saw Qin Shueqing walk out of the ward, they quickly surrounded her. "Section Chief, where are you going?" Hearing this, Qin Shueqing forced a smile and told them, "Wait for me here. I'll be back soon." "No, the doctor said that you need to rest more." "That's right. You've just recovered from a serious illness. You should rest more. Why are you going out? To buy things? Then we can run errands. Since we've already failed the quest, why don't we just relax in Spring City? The environment here is great, and it'll be good for your recovery." Although they were older than Qin Shueqing, they seemed to respect her as their leader. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing could only frown slightly, and then put on his official airs. "All right, you guys wait for me here. I'm going out with my brother-in-law. If the leader asks about me, just tell him that I'm still unconscious. That's all. I'll be back soon." After that, Qin Shueqing turned around and walked towards Chen Shi. Since the leader had spoken, the few of them had no choice but to shut their mouths. So, they just foolishly watched her walk into the elevator with Chen Shi. In the elevator, Qin Shueqing briefly explained the situation to Chen Shi. After hearing this, Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Zhonghai Tycoon? Nanyang people. The two unlucky hostages were obviously Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. Chen Shi really didn't expect that the whole thing was caused by him. But the strange thing was that he had already asked Ning Qiutong to get the medicine to ransom them. But looking at the situation in front of him, the group of Nanyang people probably went back on their word and wanted to kidnap Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei back to Nanyang. That was why the Wu Lian chased after them. Qin Shueqing was a little absent-minded. After the elevator door opened, she followed Chen Shi directly into the elevator. However, it wasn't until she walked out of the elevator that she realized. Chen Shi didn't press the button for the first floor, but the top floor. The top floor was the ICU ward. There weren't many patients or family members walking around here, so it was very quiet. Why did you bring me here? Chen Shi smiled and didn't say anything. After walking out of the elevator, he walked directly to the fire escape next to him, then followed the fire escape to the iron door on the rooftop. He gently touched it with his hand, and the iron door opened. Qin Shueqing was a little confused. But when she saw Chen Shi's mysterious look, she was a little angry. So, she didn't bother to ask any more questions. She directly followed Chen Shi to the rooftop. There was nothing special on the rooftop, only a row of central air conditioning systems. Qin Shueqing looked around, then frowned and asked, "What are you going to do?" Chen Shi stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glanced at Qin Shueqing, then said with a smile, "I'm going to take you flying." "What?" I said, "I'm going to take you flying." After saying that, Chen Shi directly stood on Qin Shueqing's right side, then gently put his hand on her waist. Qin Shueqing was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she wanted to scold Chen Shi. But Chen Shi had already taken her to the sky. The hospital below was getting smaller and smaller. In the blink of an eye, it had completely disappeared. The entire Spring City had shrunk to the size of a palm. Where are those people? Qin Shueqing was a little confused. After hearing Chen Shi's question, she turned to look at Chen Shi in a daze. She had already seen how powerful her cheap brother-in-law was when she was in the village. But when she was really taken flying by Chen Shi, she still couldn't accept it. It was too shocking. There was no sense of weightlessness, and there was no sound of wind. This was because Chen Shi had wrapped her up with her true essence. Qin Shueqing was now considered an immortal cultivator, so she was very sensitive to the fluctuations of vital essence. Therefore, her current feelings were. Her whole body was wrapped in a velvet quilt. It was very comfortable and warm. She couldn't wait to sleep here. Because they didn't have a flying Dharma treasure, Chen Shi didn't want to take advantage of his sister-in-law, so he didn't directly carry her and fly. Instead, he chose an extremely clumsy method. And that was to directly inject his vital essence into Qin Shueqing's body. His sister-in-law was now considered an immortal cultivator, so after Chen Shi's vital essence entered her body, he could circulate the Dharma art without any hindrance. It seemed like he was flying with Qin Shueqing, but in fact, the two of them were flying separately. However, Qin Shueqing didn't know this. Feeling the constant warmth from Chen Shi's hand, she actually blushed for the first time. Because she was worried that Chen Shi would notice her strange behavior, Qin Shueqing quickly turned her head to look in another direction. She didn't even hear Chen Shi talking to her. "I'm asking you a question. Where are those people?" Chen Shi thought she was frightened, so he patiently asked twice. It wasn't until the third time that Qin Shueqing finally came back to her senses. She quickly answered, "Southwest, south of Wen Mountain. It's about 180 kilometers away from Spring City." "Okay." Chen Shi looked in the direction. After confirming that it was correct, he directly flew over with Qin Shueqing. Qin Shueqing secretly glanced at Chen Shi's side profile from the corner of her eye. Chapter 153. Wunshan County in Jianghu was a very strange place. It was adjacent to North Vietnam, and the border smuggling industry had even formed a complete industrial chain. Each smuggler was 50 yuan, and the guide fee was 100 yuan. If they needed to apply for a visa, it was 200 yuan. Of course, this was without bargaining. After the smugglers paid the protection fee, they could even seek the protection of the local gangsters. If anything happened, they would come forward to solve it because the other party also had to build a brand reputation. Today, everything in Wuxia was in order. Therefore, many people didn't know what had happened here. More than 20 years ago, a major incident happened in Wuxia County's Pingyuan town. It could be said to be the largest anti-drug operation since the founding of the country. Compared to this incident, the incident in Yuezhou's Lufeng Bo Shi village paled in comparison. As for people like Dongbei's fourth master Qiao, Liaodong's Lu Yong, Shanqing's Wen Chang, and Chengdu's Lu Han, they couldn't be compared at all. The former was a gangster who could show off with a pistol, while the latter was a drug lord who had his head tied to his belt and could explode with a grenade at any time. After the anti-drug operation in Pingyuan, Wuxia became what it was today. However, it had always been the focus of the country's attention. The drug dealers weren't stupid. After the anti-drug operation ended, they had already moved to Maoping village, which was more than 100 kilometers south of Wuxia and only 2 kilometers away from the border. They usually lived in Maoping, and when they needed to work, they would smuggle to North Vietnam. They were born and raised in the local area. Every forest and every hillside couldn't be more familiar. This section of the border had no natural barriers. As long as they passed the boundary marker, they would be considered to have left the country. The border guards were also people. If they hadn't received the news in advance or happened to run into them, there was basically no way to stop these people. After leaving the country, they had no right to catch them. After returning to the country, they immediately became honest citizens. They also had no right to catch them. Qin Shueching was ambushed about 2 to 3 kilometers west of Maoping village. After the Wu Lian's investigation, they had already determined that the spy for the Nanyang people was an old drug dealer in Maoping village, Poison Dog. Poison Dog was his nickname more than 20 years ago. After Pingyuan was swept away, Poison Dog changed his name to Old Dog and hid in Maoping village. He was the type of person who didn't have much courage and was usually very cautious. He knew that he was in the business of killing people, so he never hid or transported the drugs himself. He had always let his subordinates do it. Although his reputation was great, his business was very small, and his path was very stable. And this was the only reason why he was able to survive until now. Other than selling drugs and guns, Old Dog had a high status in the underworld, so he was very well informed both domestically and internationally. This also gave him a part-time job, which was being a broker. Old Dog had recently accepted a deal. A few Nanyang people wanted to buy information from him, saying that they wanted to go to Jianghu and do something big. Going from Jianghu to Jianghu for kidnapping? Even going to the West Hills to kidnap the coal boss would be better than going to Jianghu. Although Old Dog was surprised, he did not ask further due to his professionalism. Instead, he decisively provided the other party with some weapons and information. He thought that this group of Nanyang people would definitely not return, so he didn't pay much attention to them. However, the development of the situation was somewhat beyond Old Dog's expectations. That day, the sound of gunfire shook the entire mountain range. It was as if there was a war going on. Those Nanyang people were not drug dealers, they were terrorists. The gunfire did not last long before the Nanyang people all fled into North Vietnam. The border guards could not pursue them anymore, so they started a cleanup operation. If Old Dog had not been smart enough to hide all his belongings in North Vietnam, he would have been like those unlucky people and could only put up a desperate fight. After such a big incident, Old Dog decided to close down his business. He planned to stay in Maoping village until the new year was over. On this day, the sky was blue and the clouds were white. The sun was shining brightly. Old Dog was lying on a rocking chair in the yard, basking in the sun. He was in a good mood. However, when he saw a young man and a young woman walk into the yard, Old Dog's mood immediately changed. Their handsome and fashionable appearance made it obvious that they were from a big city. The two of them were empty-handed and did not carry any weapons. However, Old Dog looked at them and immediately raised his hands. He smiled and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" Yes, Old Dog was also a covert Jing expert. He did not even know when these two people came. Raising his hands and surrendering was the best choice. Qin Shueching sized Old Dog up. The man's real age should be in his 40s. He was wearing a Chinese tunic suit from the 70s or 80s. His skin was rough and yellow, full of wrinkles, and his body was very thin. He looked like a little old man in his 60s. If he was holding a tobacco pipe, he would really look like an ordinary old man in the mountains. Where are those Nanyang people? Old Dog had not seen such a beautiful girl in a long time. He could not help but take a few more glances at Qin Shueqing. However, when he saw Qin Shueqing's empty right hand under her windbreaker, his expression changed slightly. I'm not sure. Then I'll ask again. Where are those Nanyang people? Old Dog's expression was uncertain. After hesitating for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, North Vietnam, Shan Luo. There were two kinds of people that Xianxia had to kill. One was human traffickers, and the other was drug traffickers. The former was inhumane, while the latter was inhumane. However, they needed a guide, so they could only let him live for now. Qin Shueqing turned around and looked at Chen Shi. After seeing Chen Shi nod slightly, she said to Old Dog, Get up and lead the way. Old Dog was shocked when he heard that. He said, You're going to North Vietnam? Illegally? Stop pretending. Do you think I won't kill you right now? Don't, I'll take you. Old Dog was very tactful. After all, it was his instinct to take advantage of the situation. Shan Luo was a province in the northwest of North Vietnam. It shared a border with Laos. Although it was a province, its size was equivalent to that of a county in Wuxia. North Vietnam was poor, but Shan Luo was the poorest province in North Vietnam. There was basically no industry here, and agriculture was Shan Luo's economic lifeline. Because of this poverty, poppies had become a traditional local plant. Although the North Vietnam government had been cracking down on the drug trade, it was difficult to manage such a remote mountainous area, so they could only turn a blind eye. After crossing the border, Old Dog found an off-road vehicle and drove the two of them straight to Shan Luo. The so-called Nanyang referred to the entire Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, and other regions. Those Nanyang people did not belong to the same country, so they should be some kind of organization. Qin Shueqing asked Old Dog on the way, but Old Dog insisted that he did not know. From the looks of it, he seemed to be very afraid of something. It was only 100 kilometers from Maoping village to Shan Luo. Old Dog often came here to buy goods, so he was familiar with the road. When the car drove into a small village, Old Dog stopped and pointed at a temple in front of them. He said, It's there. A temple. Qin Shueqing looked at the believers coming and going at the entrance of the temple. She could not help but look at Old Dog in surprise. Seeing this, Old Dog immediately explained with a bitter face, The temple is just a cover. The biggest drug market in North Vietnam is inside. Leader, I'll be your informant. Don't expose me, or else I'll be dead. Okay, then wait for us here. Qin Shueqing got out of the off-road vehicle in high spirits, then walked directly to the temple in front of them. Perhaps it was because Chen Shi was next to her, so when Qin Shueqing walked to the temple, she was not worried at all. Instead, she felt a little excited. It was a feeling that Qin Wanqing had never experienced before, that she had someone backing her up. It was very exciting, however. She did not notice it at all. She was like a child who was bullied outside, and now she came back with her parents to get back at them. Chapter 154. Nanyang did not seem big, but it was one of the more densely populated areas in the world. There were many immigrants here, and because it was once a colony, the locals had many different beliefs, such as Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism. Among them, most of them believed in Buddhism. Unlike Wuxia's Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism was more popular in Nanyang. The difference between the two was that Mahayana Buddhism promoted the salvation of others and oneself, while Hinayana Buddhism promoted self-indulgence. If one had to describe it, one could say that one was a bus, while the other was a motorcycle. Hinayana Buddhism was a derogatory term for Mahayana Buddhism. In fact, Hinayana Buddhism's followers did not agree with this term. They called themselves Southern Theravada Buddhism. The Nanyang region mainly believed in Hinayana Buddhism, so the temples were very different from those in Wuxia. Wuxia's temples were mostly palatial, majestic, and solemn. Nanyang's temples, on the other hand, were mostly standalone. They were relatively small, with a Buddhist hall and a Buddhist pagoda, surrounded by scattered monks' residences or places for rest and study. Mahayana Buddhism's temples had many statues of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all kinds of protectors. However, Hinayana Buddhism's temples only had one statue. Shanluo was too poor, so most of the villagers here wore coarse linen clothes. Therefore, when a young woman like Qin Shueqing appeared in a trench coat and jeans, she immediately attracted a lot of attention. Nanyang was tropical and had a tropical monsoon climate. Most of the people here had light brown, or even dark brown skin. Qin Shueqing's skin was fair and beautiful. Compared to them, she immediately looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. After hearing Old Dog say that this was where the Nanyang people were hiding, Qin Shueqing immediately walked towards the temple. Her sister-in-law seemed to have a bad temper and was not easy to get along with, but in fact, she had never even killed a chicken before. Although she had a license to kill, she had always controlled herself when she was on missions. Once the enemy lost the ability to resist, she would immediately stop. However, being friendly to others did not mean that others would be friendly to her. That shot had completely angered Qin Shueqing. As a result, her wound had not even healed, and she was still in an extremely weak state. When she heard that she was going to avenge her, she immediately followed him. If she was not as skilled as him, it would be fine. However, the other party arranged for a sniper to ambush and almost take her life. Although her life was saved, her right hand. So she had to take revenge. After seeing Qin Wanqing get out of the car and leave, Xianxia also opened the door for her. Before leaving, Xianxia smiled and said to the old dog, "Let me give you a piece of advice. You better stay here and wait for us to come back." Then, he followed Qin Shueqing. After the two of them left, the old dog spat out the window, hesitating whether to drive away now. However, of course of the world's Chen. This young man was not simple. Even if he ran away now, he could only run away as a monk, but not as a temple. Unless he never returned to Wuxia. His wife and children were still in Wuxia. How could he not go back? This was indeed a temple. It looked a little ordinary. After entering the main hall, the first thing that came into view was a golden statue of Buddha. A monk was meditating by the side. When he saw Qin Shueqing, he said a few words. Qin Shueqing did not understand. She frowned and tried to say, "I'm looking for someone." The monk was stunned. Then he said in awkward Chinese, "Who are you looking for?" Qin Shueqing was about to speak. But at this moment, she saw a figure walking out from behind the Buddha statue. It was a dark and thin man. He was about 30 years old. His skin was dark, and he wore a coarse short coat. The muscles on his arms were exposed. Qin Shueqing was indeed too eye-catching. So the dark and thin man saw her at first sight. The dark and thin man was stunned for a moment. Then he reached for his waist. "I'm looking for him." The moment she saw the dark skinny man, Qin Wanqing's expression couldn't help but turn cold. After saying that, she seemed to have turned into a white crane and flew toward the man in an instant. The dark skinny man's reaction was also very fast. Just as Qin Wanqing pounced on him, he had already taken out a pistol from his waist. Who knew how much blood these people had on their hands, so they didn't hesitate at all when they fired. He aimed the gun at Qin Shueqing and wanted to pull the trigger. However, after he pulled the trigger with his index finger, the trigger did not move. It was as if it was stuck. Because, this time, her brother-in-law was standing behind her sister-in-law. After all, she had just recovered from a serious injury. Her skills were not as good as before. What if she was not careful and got shot again? The dark and thin man reacted quickly. When he saw that the trigger could not be pulled, he turned around and wanted to run. But at this time, Qin Shueqing had already rushed in front of him. She raised her left hand and grabbed his neck. Then she pressed him against the wall. Because she used too much force, the dark and thin man's eyes rolled back. With Qin Shueqing's character and habits, it was absolutely impossible for her to have any close contact with such a rough and stinky man. But now she was angry, so she did not care about anything. She grabbed the dark and thin man by the neck and lifted him up. Then she asked coldly, "Where is the Wuxia that you kidnapped?" All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The monk next to them was an ordinary person. After being stunned for a moment, the monk was frightened by the scene in front of him. He ran toward the back of the temple. Xianxia looked at the back of the monk and did not choose to stop him. Instead, he went behind Qin Shueqing and asked casually, "Are you sure that he can understand Chinese?" Qin Shueqing could not help but be angry when she heard this. She was completely angry now, so she did not care about anything else. Her left hand tightened again, and the dark and thin man immediately rolled his eyes. "Speak. Where is the Wuxia that you kidnapped?" "That's enough. He is about to be strangled to death." She was speechless. He patted her shoulder. Then, She walked to the dark skinny man's side and took the gun from his hand. Bang! 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 The crisp sound of a gunshot rang out in the main hall, startling a flock of birds. The peace of the small village was broken by the sudden gunshot. The moment the villagers heard the gunshot, they all ran back to their homes. In a short while, there was not a single person on the dirt road in the village. "What are you doing?" After the gunshot rang out, Qin Shueqing immediately let go of her hand. The dark and thin man fell to the ground and wailed in pain. She fired 3 shots. One was aimed at the sky, while the other 2 were aimed at the dark and thin man's thighs. She looked at Shi in surprise. Shi smiled and played with the gun in his hand. This was an M1911. .45 caliber. There were many scratches on the gun, and it looked a little old. It was probably an antique left behind from the Vietnam War. Her sister-in-law was a civil servant, so no matter how angry she was still bound by the rules of a civil servant. Therefore, when Shi fired the gun, her sister-in-law seemed to be unable to accept it. That was because she had not changed her mind. This was not Wuxia. The person in front of her was not a kind person. This was a drug lord, a level higher than a drug dealer. Drug dealers could also be forced to take the risk to engage in this line of work. However, drug lords were the source of all evil. For the sake of profit, they had sold their souls to the devil. Qin Shueqing instinctively wanted to be merciful. However, she had never thought about what kind of experience it would be if she fell into their hands. The drug production in Nanyang accounted for almost 70% of the world's drug production. Thinking about those anti-narcotics police officers who died in the battle, it would not be enough to drag this group of crazy drug lords out and shoot them 10,000 times. Talking about humanity with them? First of all, they had to have humanity. She handed the gun to Qin Shueqing, then patted her shoulder as encouragement. "Okay, you're here to find trouble, not to drink and chat with them. Instead of letting you find them, let them find you." Chapter 155. Play the Eru with full health. Then fight the boss with low health. First the small ones, then the big ones, and finally the boss. That was a scene only seen in movies and TV shows. Instead of fighting the small monsters all the way, She preferred to ask, "Who else?" Qin Shueqing seemed to be in a daze. She smiled and did not explain further. After about a minute, there was a rush of footsteps from the back of the hall. The two turned around and saw a group of Nanyang people with various weapons suddenly rushing into the hall. There were at least 15 or 16 people in front of them. Most of the people here could be said to be short and vigorous. Some were holding pistols, some were holding submachine guns, and some were even holding AK-47s. There were 2 old pagoda trees in front of the temple. They were estimated to have lived for hundreds of years. The lush leaves blocked most of the sunlight and made the hall look a little dim. There were 3 categories of countries in the world: developed countries, developing China, and least developed countries. Vietnam was originally at the bottom of the list, but the economic situation had improved significantly in recent years, so it jumped from the least developed country to developing China. Although it became developing China, there was a clear difference between Vietnam and Wuxia. Vietnam today was equivalent to Wuxia in the 80s and 90s. It was a critical time to go from chaos to order. Vietnam banned guns, but because there was a long anti-colonial struggle in this place, there were a lot of weapons. Although the Vietnam government tried to confiscate them, the effect was limited. Most of the guns smuggled in Wuxia came from this place. Since they were smuggling arms, it was easy to guess the firearms in the hands of the drug lords. The existence of drug lords, who were anti-human, was a cancer to society. It was not that Shi was exaggerating, but if he pulled out all of these people and shot them, it was impossible to kill by mistake. Shi's marksmanship was very good, and the previous 2 shots were penetrating wounds. The bullets did not hit the bone or artery, but went directly through the thigh. Penetrating wounds were easy to treat, but the prerequisite was that the bleeding had to be stopped in time. Otherwise, excessive blood loss would lead to shock or even death. The group of people swarmed into the hall like a swarm of bees. After glancing at their companions who were still wailing on the ground, they all pointed their guns at Chen Shi and Qin Shueqing. However, what made Chen Shi a little surprised was that among this group of Nanyang people, there was clearly a foreigner with a different style. Chinese? Chinese and Nanyang people still had obvious differences in appearance, so they could be distinguished at a glance. The Chinese man didn't carry any weapons, but from his position, it wasn't hard to tell that he held a high position among the Nanyang people. "What are you two doing here?" He looked to be in his 30s. His skin was yellowish, but he did not have the tan that was commonly seen on Nanyang people. His companion on the ground was still wailing and bleeding, but he chose to ignore it. Instead, he looked at Qin Shueqing with interest. Two long legs stretched tight by a pair of slim jeans, a perky chest under a white knitted sweater, fair and tender skin, and exquisite facial features that seemed to be made by nature. They were used to seeing rural women in the small valleys of Nanyang. Suddenly, such a stunning beauty popped up. These people really wanted to stare their eyes out. Qin Shueqing had never been pointed at by so many people in her life, so she subconsciously frowned. No matter how powerful a martial arts master was, he was still a mortal. No matter how fast he couldn't outrun bullets. No matter how strong his muscles were, he couldn't withstand a round of bullets. She had always been the one leading people with guns. Now that her position had changed, she was really not used to it. Was she afraid? She wasn't afraid that it was fake. However, when she thought of her cheap brother-in-law behind her, Qin Shueqing suddenly became very confident. International Wu Lian Headquarters Emergency Management Office in Beijing. We're here today to look for two kidnapped Wuxia people. We hope that you will cooperate with the investigation. The Chinese man was stunned for a moment. Then, he used Nanyang language to translate Qin Shueqing's words. Just as he finished translating, his companions beside him started laughing out loud. This Chinese man was Bai Rongqing. His grandfather immigrated to Nanyang and his family never left. There were many Chinese in Nanyang. They were the largest group of Chinese overseas and were also the most economically successful group. If the Jews controlled the economy of the United States, then the Chinese in Nanyang controlled the entire economy of Nanyang. Of course, this was a slightly exaggerated statement, but it was very intuitive. The Chinese in Nanyang were intelligent, hardworking, and thrifty. After they established themselves in Nanyang, they immediately worked hard to improve their social status. Bai Rongqing's father was not satisfied with the status quo, so he started the drug business. They could be considered drug lords, but they could also be considered not. Because they were just middlemen who were responsible for pulling strings. For example, after a boss of a gang in Hong Kong was killed or arrested, the first thing the new boss would do was to visit the middleman in Nanyang. Production and sales were important links that could not be separated. The big drug lords were closely watched by Interpol and generally did not leave their territory easily. At this time, the middlemen needed to step in. In recent years, many countries around the world had increased their efforts to crack down on drug trafficking, but the global drug trade did not decrease. Instead, it increased by more and more. Why? It was all because of the middlemen. They could be said to be omnipresent middlemen. Money or guns? Choose one. Either cooperate or your whole family dies. The group of people led by Bai Rongqing spoke in English. Qin Shueqing could not understand. However, how could she not understand their wretched expressions and obscene actions? Her sister-in-law was so angry that her face turned red. However, the black barrel in front of her made her quite wary. Seeing this, Xianxia took a step forward. The hall was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere seemed relaxed. However, in reality, the two sides were at daggers drawn. After Xianxia took a step forward, Bai Rongqing's face suddenly froze. His companions next to him also pointed their guns at Xianxia. Then, Xianxia suddenly opened his arms. Then, he leaned forward slightly and pressed both of his arms forward. The true essence around his body suddenly erupted like a tsunami, surging and surging violently. There was no sound, only a series of exclamations. This group of armed thugs was like a bowling ball that had been knocked over. They were instantly thrown off their feet. However, their reaction was also extremely fast. Although they were dizzy and their blood was surging. After this group of thugs fell to the ground, their first reaction was not to get up, but to lie on the ground, raise their guns, and pull the trigger. Da-da-da. There was a series of fierce gunshots in the hall. The bullets swept the wooden door, and suddenly a cloud of wood chips exploded. Old Dog was sitting in the off-road vehicle. He could hear the fierce gunshots coming from the temple from afar. With his experience, he could even tell which model the gunshots belonged to. Sigh, they're asking for it. After sighing pretentiously, Old Dog leisurely lit a cigarette, intending to finish it before setting off. The gunshot sounded for about half a minute. Then, the gunshot stopped abruptly. In the temple, Bai Rongqing sat on the ground, looking at everything in front of him in a daze. The originally solemn Buddhist hall had been dyed a different shade of crimson by the fresh blood. The wooden floor was also covered in blood. Other than the blood stains on the walls and doorposts, there was also some minced meat stuck to them. The minced meat and fresh blood mixed together, constantly emitting a strong fishy smell. This purgatory-like scene made Xianxia very uncomfortable. She quickly covered her mouth and ran out of the temple. The blood had already dyed Bai Rongqing red, but there was not a single wound on his body. What happened just now? Bai Rongqing's mind was a mess. Blood flowed down from the corner of his eyes, and his ears were buzzing. He only remembered. The young man in front of him suddenly waved his arms. Then, his men opened fire. But the target of their shots, it was not the young man in front of him, but the teammates next to him. More than 10 people suddenly picked up guns and shot at each other, resulting in this scene of purgatory on earth. She calmly looked at Bai Rongqing and suddenly asked, "Can we have a good chat now?" After hearing his voice, Bai Rongqing could not help but tremble. Chapter 156. Nanyang was different from Wuxia. Wuxia's mysterious power came from the necromancers, and it had a bit of the style of an immortal. The necromancers were righteous, and Nanyang was evil. Nanyang was tropical, with lush vegetation, poisonous snakes, and insects. After animals died, they were prone to rot and maggots. But it was such a sunny place that gave birth to the 3 most evil sorcery in the world: voodoo, black magic, and black magic. Every one of them was filthy and evil. Zhang Jiada's youngest son, Zhang Hongyuan, learned black magic in Nanyang, and then used it on his father, causing his father to suffer from illness and pain. Bai Rongqing had seen these mysterious powers. But no matter how powerful the voodoo was, it was impossible to instantly control people's minds and make them kill each other. Although he had participated in warlord wars and was used to the battlefield where limbs were flying everywhere, Bai Rongqing was just an ordinary person after all. So when he saw the scene in front of him, he was immediately scared out of his wits. More than a dozen brothers who spent time with him suddenly pulled out guns and fought, and died tragically around him. Such a strange scene could only be described with the word ghost. Looking at Bai Rongqing's sorry state, She couldn't help but glance at him with some disgust, then frowned and asked, "Tell me, where are the 2 Wuxia people? Who is the mastermind behind their kidnapping?" Bai Rongqing was stunned for a moment, then immediately shouted in panic, "Mayman! It has nothing to do with me. Bacha, it was Bacha who did it." "What do you mean? Speak clearly." His tone was very panicked, and his Mandarin was not very standard, so She didn't understand for a while. "I was only responsible for providing support. It was Bacha who ordered it. He's in Mayman. Those 2 Wuxia people have been brought back to Mayman by him." This time, She finally understood. Mayman should be a place. Bacha was the mastermind of this series of events. Since he was in charge of providing support, the person who arranged for the sniper was definitely the one in front of him. Thinking of this, She turned his head to look outside the hall, but Xianxia had long since disappeared. It was probably because he had never seen such a bloody scene before, so he felt a little nauseous. Forget it. Remember to be a good person in your next life and accumulate more good karma. Hearing this, Bai Rongqing's expression suddenly changed. He thought that She was going to kill him, so he quickly knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing, begging for mercy. "Don't kill me. None of my business. I am also from Wuxia. Don't kill me." She didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, she turned around and walked out of the hall. Looking at his back as he left, Bai Rongqing thought that his begging had worked, so he was so excited that he wanted to stand up. However, at this moment, Xianxia, who had already walked out of the hall, suddenly snapped his fingers. A flame suddenly jumped out from his fingertips. Then, the flame was like a dandelion, slowly floating on top of the blood in the hall. Like a spark on oil, the blood on the ground did not seem to be blood, but gasoline. The raging fire engulfed by Rongqing in an instant. Outside the hall, when old dog saw Qin Shueqing walk out of the hall safe and sound, he could not help but widen his eyes. When he saw Xianxia walk out of the hall, his face suddenly looked as if he had seen a ghost. The gunshots were so intense just now. Could it be that they were shooting? Xianxia waved in old dog's direction, and old dog immediately started the car and anxiously drove in front of the two of them. While the two of them were in the car, old dog secretly glanced at the hall. Then, he could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and cold sweat appeared on his face. Go to Mayman. Old dog had not recovered from the shock, and when he heard Xianxia say it again, he said with a panicked expression, Mayman? Golden Triangle. Hearing this, Xianxia raised his eyebrows and could not help but chuckle. Golden Triangle? Let's go, let's take a look. It had to be said that the old dog was also very powerful. After entering Laos, he contacted a helicopter and directly flew Xianxia and Qin Shueqing to the Golden Triangle. This place was inaccessible and mountainous. Most of the areas were more than 3,000 meters above sea level, and the roads were all small roads, so they had to rely on horses and mules to transport drugs. Now that they had money, helicopters naturally became the most popular item for drug traffickers. 20 years ago, Kun Sa ruled the world here, but after Kun Sa's death, this place returned to its previous state of fragmentation, similar to the three kingdoms of Qin and Han. Bacha is a drug trafficker who suddenly rose to prominence in the past 10 years, and his group of people are not afraid to fight. In terms of strength, he is below average, but in terms of terror, he is definitely in the top 3. At this rate, I think he will become the second Kun Sa. Seeing that Bai Rongqing was easily taken care of by them, old dog was finally willing to open his mouth. Whatever Xianxia asked, he answered honestly, and did not dare to be hazy at all. After flying for almost 40 minutes, a small village appeared in Xianxia's field of vision. This was a very backward village, and the style of the houses were all wooden high houses unique to Nanyang. A few children ran around the village from time to time, and it was a peaceful scene. The helicopter landed in the open space outside the village, but the children seemed to be used to it, and did not even gather around to look at it. Qin Shueqing got off the helicopter and saw a sea of red flowers. It was a sea of poppies, and they were as red as blood. They were delicate and beautiful, but they were full of murderous intent. Mayman is Bacha's nest, and there are anti-aircraft guns there. Planes cannot get close, or they will shoot them down, so we have to ride horses there. Old dog gave a few simple instructions to a villager, and the villager pulled 3 horses from the stable. The 3 of them rode their horses slowly along the small path, just like tourists who had come here for a vacation. After walking for about an hour, the old dog finally stopped. He pointed at the winding path in front of them and said with a smile, "Leader, we're here. After going over the hill in front, we will be in Bacha's territory. There are sentries on the mountain, so I won't send you there." After that, old dog wanted to turn his horse around and return to the village. "Stop." Xianxia stopped him. At this time, Qin Shueqing also turned to look at Xianxia. They came here not only for revenge, but also to save people. If it was only for revenge, they only needed to sneak in, kill, and run. But if they wanted to save people, they had to think about it carefully. After all, the hostages were just ordinary people, and a bullet could kill them. Qin Shueqing had already thought of a few plans in an instant. But after thinking about it, she changed her habit and did not immediately say her opinion, but silently waited for Xianxia to make the final decision. Everything was up to him. Assassination? Or a trick? Xianxia thought about it for a while, and then made a decision. Like I said, stay here and wait for us to come back. After glancing at old dog, Xianxia turned to Qin Shueqing and said, "Let's go, I want to see how poisonous and powerful that drug lord is." After hearing his bold declaration, Qin Shueqing immediately nodded excitedly. Chapter 157. This was a place where poppies bloomed, and where drugs were rampant and evil were bred. In people's impression, This place represented darkness. However, after experiencing it for themselves, people realized that this place was so beautiful and sunny. If they didn't know that they were poppies, they would only think that it was a sea of flowers more beautiful than roses, delicate and dazzling. The tropical monsoon climate made the vegetation and trees here particularly lush. The entire mountain was basically covered with green shade, and it was a beautiful scenery that belonged to nature. Even the spirit of heaven and earth was far better than the Qinling Mountains, and this place was actually a paradise. Just from looking at the scenery, it seemed that this place was completely unrelated to darkness, drugs, and murder. It was 3:30 in the afternoon in Xianxia, and the sun was particularly bright in Meimen. The sentry post was a wooden tower that was about 4 meters tall. On the left and right, there was a Nanyang soldier with a gun on guard. It was not right to say that they were soldiers, because they were actually a group of militiamen who had not undergone military training. The fierceness in their bones was enough to run rampant. The two militiamen lazily leaned on the sentry post's railing. At this time, there was suddenly a faint sound of horse hooves in front of them. When the two horses were only about 30 meters away from the sentry post, the sentries suddenly came back to their senses. After greeting each other, they leaned out. There were two horses, with a man and a woman sitting on each of them. Looking at the bright clothes and fashionable clothes, it was as if they were tourists who had mistakenly entered this place. But this was the core area of the Golden Triangle. How could there be tourists? The sentry on the left was rather alert and immediately aimed his gun at the two of them. Then, he started mumbling something that no one knew what to say. Perhaps seeing that they had no weapons on them, the two sentry did not immediately shoot. The horse went straight to the wooden door in the middle of the two sentry posts. At this time, the sentry finally saw the appearance of the two people. Beauty knew no boundaries. After seeing the woman's appearance, one of the sentries couldn't help but whistle. Then, he stuck his head out and mumbled something that no one knew what he was talking about. Xianxia glanced at Xianxia and suddenly asked, "You left, I right?" "Up to you." "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia suddenly jumped up from the back of the horse. She jumped 3 or 4 meters high. Like a swallow returning to its nest, she leaped into the sentry's basket. The one on the left should be a veteran, so when he saw Xianxia suddenly jump from the back of the horse, he immediately reacted and quickly pointed his gun at Xianxia. But at this time, She picked up a leaf and suddenly threw it at the sentinel on the left. The green leaf instantly turned into a deadly blade and pierced through the guard's throat, leaving a long trail of blood in the air. Only brain damage could lead to immediate death, so the sentinel did not die immediately. He widened his eyes and hurriedly dropped the gun. He used both hands to tightly grip his neck, trying to press down on the wound. But how could the wound on the aorta be pressed with the hand? All of this happened in a flash. Even when Xianxia jumped in front of him, the sentinel on the right still had not recovered. He stared blankly at the beautiful woman in front of him. Then his eyes suddenly turned black, and he completely said goodbye to this world. Xianxia smashed the top of his head with her palm. After taking care of the sentinel on the right, Xianxia jumped down from the basket and gently landed on the back of the horse. This was the first time she killed someone. But strangely, Xianxia did not feel any discomfort. She felt as if she had just casually killed a fly, so she did not feel guilty at all. When She saw her like this, he knew that she might be thinking about life again, so he immediately interrupted her thoughts and said with a smile, "You have to remember one thing. Anyone who points a gun at you, regardless of gender or age, deserves to die." Because he was afraid that she did not understand, she added, "When a normal person gets a gun, their first reaction is to hesitate. So those who get a gun and are ready to shoot must have killed before or are mentally prepared to kill. If you hesitate, then after he pulls the trigger, the one who will die will be you." Xianxia frowned and thought for a while. Then she said with some discomfort, "I understand." After saying that, she clamped her legs together and rode forward on her horse. Seeing this, she could only helplessly shrug. He guessed that his sister-in-law did not listen to him. It was about good and evil, killing and forgiveness. She actually agreed with this, saying, "Forgiving them is God's business. I am only responsible for sending them to see God." Meimen's territory was very large. After passing the sentry post, the two saw large areas of poppy fields. Just like the rape fields next to the highway. When spring came, there was an endless sea of golden flowers on both sides of the highway. But here, The rape flowers turned into poppy flowers. The sea of golden flowers also turned into an endless sea of blood-red flowers. The two rode on the horse and walked on the dirt path in the field. Most of the flower farmers were women. When they saw them, they all stopped what they were doing and stood up to look at the two strangers who came out of nowhere. Now that everything was humanized, the treatment of flower farmers was much better than before. In the past, if they did not work for drug lords, they would have their hands and feet chopped off or even their lives. Times had changed. Now, drug lords would give generous wages, so more and more flower farmers were attracted to work for them. In the off-season, flower farmers could even go down the mountain to the city to buy. For flower farmers, this was just a job to support their families. Xianxia was a little surprised by the lax security here. Except for the 2 sentry posts, there was not a single soldier in sight. She did not know that now was not 20 years ago. The weapons and equipment of drug lords had been upgraded long ago. The rich ones even rented satellites to keep an eye on the troop movements of the surrounding countries. Even without satellites, radar was a necessary item. So the function of the sentry post was more like announcing the ownership of this territory to the outside world. Most people would not go to the nest of drug lords for no reason. After all, trespassing into a military base would at most be expelled, but trespassing into a drug lord's territory would cost one's life. Meimen was like a small town. There were several villages around the town, and the villages were surrounded by a sea of flowers. The two walked for a while. After passing through a sea of flowers, the terrain suddenly opened up, and the reinforced concrete building finally appeared in front of them. In front of them was the legendary town of Meimen. Xianxia curiously looked at the layout of the town and found that the place was completely arranged according to the plan of a military base. In the center of the base, there were 2 missile launchers, and several cannons were arranged on the roof next to them. A little further ahead, there was a helipad full of armed helicopters. On the right side of the town, there was a training ground, where hundreds of armed soldiers were being trained. Except for the lack of an airport runway, there was really everything here. Xianxia was a little stunned, because her impression of drug lords was still in the movies. However, what she did not know was that the movies were all about the drug lords of Kun Sa's time. Decades had passed, and even Wuxia's aircraft carrier had been launched. If the drug lords had not been upgraded, they would have been wiped out by the government long ago. How about we go back and think about it? It was true that her sister-in-law was arrogant, but she was definitely not stupid. No wonder the government had not shouted the slogan of encirclement and suppression of the Golden Triangle in recent years. It was because the fight would be terrible. In the past, the soldiers rushed with guns. 2 heavy machine guns could kill a regiment, and they could not take a step forward. Chapter 158. Looking at the modern military base in front of her, Xianxia had some thoughts of retreating. But when she heard her words, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He first glanced at Xianxia's right arm, then asked with a faint smile, "Do you still remember why you're here?" Xianxia was stunned. After looking down at her right arm unnaturally, she said hesitantly, "Are you really that confident?" "I'm above the heavens." When he said this, Xianxia couldn't help but look at Chen Shi. Her almond-shaped eyes widened, as if she was very surprised. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but ask, "What? Is it strange?" Xianxia realized that she had lost her composure, so she quickly shook her head and sighed, "You should be above the heavens." "That's good. Go, I'm in a hurry. I have to go back to Shangjing later." "Okay." Perhaps she was infected by Chen Shi's strong confidence. Xianxia nodded heavily and didn't say anything else. She jumped off the horse and walked directly to the base in front of them. Chen Shi rarely rode a horse, so naturally, he wanted to ride to his heart's content. So he leisurely followed behind his sister-in-law to the base. If Nian was here, she would have already clamored to ride a big horse. The base didn't have a wall. It was surrounded by a circle of barbed wire, and the so-called gate was only a railing that could be raised. The strange behavior of the two had already attracted the attention of the sentinels. However, their attire made the sentinels think that they were customers who came to buy drugs, so they didn't suspect anything. Therefore, when Xianxia approached the gate, a soldier came out from the side of the sentry post, and then he started talking. Xianxia didn't look at the soldier. Instead, he looked at an empty space not far behind the soldier. There were a lot of wooden stakes there, and a few of them had people tied to them, just like the crucified Jesus. These people were full of scars, and they hung on the stakes motionlessly. No one knew whether they were dead or alive. She took a closer look, and after confirming that those people were not Wuxia's people, she could not help but let out a sigh of relief. If the hostages were to die here, the reputation of the Shangjing Emergency Department would be completely lost. Seeing that Qin Shueqing didn't reply, the soldier was a little angry, so he wanted to come up to her and take her back for questioning. Just as he reached out to grab Qin Shueqing's left arm, Qin Shueqing made the first move and directly grabbed the soldier's neck. Gotcha! Qin Shueqing exerted a little force with her slender fingers, and the unlucky guy's neck was broken. She wasn't a helpless flower vase. Even if one of her hands was broken, she was still a great master in the gang state. There was a surveillance room in the base, and there were many monitors in it, monitoring the movements in the surrounding villages. When they passed by the sentry post, because they moved too quickly, the monitors didn't notice what happened there. Now that Qin Shueqing was standing at the entrance of the base, this move immediately attracted the attention of the monitors. Looking at the soldier who was casually thrown to the ground, the monitors immediately sounded the alarm. The shrill alarm suddenly rang over the village. At this moment, the entire base seemed to come alive, and countless soldiers rushed out from all corners of the base with guns. Even the soldiers who were still training on the training ground immediately stopped their training, and under the command of the instructor, they instantly entered combat mode. Looking at Qin Shueqing, who stirred up the hornet's nest, Shi couldn't help but feel speechless. He originally thought that Qin Shueqing would sneak in, blow up a few houses to distract the enemy, and then take action. He didn't expect that she would attack the door in such a simple and crude way. This style of doing things was somewhat similar to his style. When Qin Shueqing heard the sudden sound of the alarm, she was also shocked. She carefully looked around and made sure that no one else was watching before she made her move, but she forgot that there was a monitoring system here. After cursing herself a few times with some annoyance, Qin Shueqing quickly jumped into the sentry post next to her. She really wasn't cut out for assassination and sneak attacks. The sentry post at the entrance of the base was not like the previous sentry tower. It was a square reinforced concrete building, 2 stories high, and the walls were thicker, which served as both a sentry post and a defense function. There were 3 soldiers in the sentry post. After hearing the alarm, one of them was ready to go out to check the situation, but he didn't expect to run into Qin Shueqing, who rushed into the sentry post. Almost without any reaction, he fell to the ground silently. A master could kill people within 10 steps like killing chickens. When Qin Shueqing sneaked up to the second floor, the other 2 soldiers were still observing the situation on the second floor. They saw Shi leisurely riding a horse in front of them. When they were about to shoot the stranger in front of them, Qin Shueqing had already twisted their necks from behind. After the monitor explained the enemy's situation and location through the broadcast, the soldiers all rushed toward the sentry post. After all, they were not a regular army, but the private armed forces of the drug lords, so they didn't have high discipline. When they heard that the enemy had invaded, they swarmed over. Qin Shueqing sneaked a glance at the situation below. There were at least 200 to 300 people, and they were all fully armed soldiers. These private armed forces were actually not much different from terrorists, so when they saw the body at the gate, they didn't need anyone to give orders, and 3 soldiers carrying rocket launchers directly walked out. The drug lords lacked everything but money. It was just a sentry post, and they could just blow it up and fix it later. They were carrying Carl Gustav M3 84mm rocket launchers, which were only produced in the 1990s and had been purchased and equipped by many countries. They could destroy all armored vehicles, including heavy tanks, as well as defense facilities such as bunkers, field fortifications, and so on within a range of 300 meters. The rocket launcher's initial speed was not fast, only 110 meters per second. After it was fired, it would keep accelerating until it was close to the speed of sound. 3 rocket launchers left 3 long trails of thick smoke behind them as they blasted directly toward the isolated sentry post. Qin Shueqing hid behind a hole in the wall on the second floor of the sentry post, not daring to show her head. After hearing a series of buzzing sounds, she felt that something was wrong. Just as she was about to secretly observe the situation outside, a violent explosion occurred. Boom! 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 Gravel flew everywhere, and the ground shook. The sentry post shook violently, and Xianxia suddenly felt a sense of fear in her heart. After about 10 seconds, the violent shaking gradually subsided. Xianxia secretly poked her head out and was immediately shocked. The explosion did not hit the sentry post, but the crowd below. Fortunately, they didn't use anti-personnel shells, but armor-piercing shells. Otherwise there would be no survivors here. Clatter, clatter. The sound of horse hooves sounded again. After using his true essence to calm the frightened horse, Xianxia rode into the base leisurely. He had to admit that his sister-in-law was indeed talented in gathering monsters. Otherwise, even if there were 3 more rocket launchers, it would be impossible to cause such a huge loss to the enemy. They actually dared to shoot his sister-in-law in front of him with an RPG. Taking the layout of a regular military base as an example, the outer perimeter was a sentry post, surveillance tower, machine gun tower, concrete walls, and barbed wire. Inside the base was an arsenal, an armory, a fuel depot, and barracks, including dormitories, dining halls, and toilets. The drug lords were not so particular. The anti-aircraft guns were placed at the entrance of the base, and the surface-to-air missile launchers were placed in the middle of the base. What was even more bizarre was that there was actually a villa not far behind the missile launcher. The villa was 2 stories high and there was a small garden in front of it. It was obvious that this was the base of the drug lords. The 2 of them surrounded the base. Xianxia held his gun and constantly shot at the fish that tried to escape the net. Whoever dared to show their head, he raised his gun and shot. 30 bullets were quickly used up. When there were no more bullets, he threw down the rifle and shattered the ground with his foot. With a wave of his hand, a series of gravel accurately hit the enemy's forehead. In the beginning, some small shrimps tried to resist by shooting, but as the 2 of them gradually went deeper, the sound of gunfire gradually subsided. The 2 of them walked straight to the villa. At this time, Xianxia discovered a problem. In the beginning, 200 to 300 people died. In addition to the small shrimps that came out one after another, there were at most 400 people. It was impossible for such a large military base to only have so few people. No matter how he thought about it, something felt wrong. Then where were the people? Xianxia pondered as he pushed open the door of the villa with Xianxia. This was a magnificent villa. If the floors were a little higher, it could almost be called a castle. The drug lords had no taste and were purely nouveau riche. Therefore, the decoration in the villa was very luxurious. There were all kinds of gorgeous and luxurious furnishings that could be considered dazzling. Among them, the most eye-catching was the bearskin carpet that could be seen as soon as they walked in. The villa was empty. There was no one in sight. The 2 of them looked at each other. When Xianxia was about to say something, a child suddenly appeared on the stairs on the 2nd floor. It was a Nanyang child who looked to be only 12 or 13 years old. His face was full of fear and timidity. In sharp contrast, the AK-74 in his arms was the stark contrast. As the most widely used automatic rifle in the world, the AK-47 was known as the world's king of guns. A total of 100 million units were produced. At least 53 countries purchased and fully equipped it. 5 countries even painted it on their national flags. This was the synonym for slaughter. So far, at least 20 million people had died under the muzzle of the AK-47. It was far more than the number of casualties caused by the 2 atomic bombs in Japan. The black barrel trembled slightly. The child seemed to be very afraid. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but be stunned. But in the moment when she was distracted, the child suddenly opened fire. Da-da-da! The muzzle of the gun spat out tongues of fire. There was no fear on the child's face. There was only excitement and fanaticism. The recoil of the AK-47 was well known. However, because the child had been practicing for a long time, his hands were very steady. He stood on the stairs on the 2nd floor as if he had gone crazy. He laughed wildly as he sprayed bullets downwards. The bullets swept the table, the windows, the furniture, and instantly tore everything into pieces. The 30 bullets were quickly used up. When the child put down the gun and looked at his masterpiece proudly, he suddenly realized that although it was a mess downstairs, the 2 people stood there without moving at all. After sighing softly, Xianxia turned his head and said to Xianxia helplessly, The bullets fired from the gun of a 14-year-old child are as deadly as the bullets fired from the gun of a 40-year-old man, maybe even more deadly. Xianxia heard this sentence before. It was from the King of War. However, when this scene happened in front of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel very complicated. She did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the bullets that stopped in front of them all turned around and then shot at the child on the stairs at a faster speed. The body was a child, but the heart was a demon, so can't stay. Originally, She came with the mentality of avenging his sister-in-law, but after being disturbed by this child, even he began to feel a little uncomfortable. The child was not wrong. It was the world that was wrong. Even a teenager was trained to be a demon that killed without batting an eyelid. This kind of behavior had completely infuriated him. After frowning and glancing at the stairs, She suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He quickly looked back at the door of the villa. Xianxia saw his actions. While she was confused, Shi's figure had already disappeared from the hall. Almost at the same time, he was outside the villa. Chapter 160. Missiles were divided into strategic missiles and tactical missiles. The Tau anti-tank missile was a tactical missile. It was produced and used in large quantities during the Cold War. It could be launched from vehicles or helicopters, or it could be carried by infantry. It was mainly used to attack hard targets such as tanks, armored vehicles, bunkers, and artillery positions. The missile was 164 meters long. The diameter was 152 meters, and the total weight was 47 kilograms. In the unfinished Syrian war, a new tactic gradually became popular. As long as they encountered a fortification that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, they would directly bombard it with a Tau missile and blow it up together with the fortification. Simple and convenient. Of course, this tactic was patented by the rich. The price of a Tau anti-tank missile was about $60,000, which was equivalent to 10 AK-47s plus 100,000 bullets. And it was also equivalent to a BMW 5 Series. It sounded like a lot, but for drug dealers, this small amount of money was nothing. When the Tau missile was just launched, its flying speed was only 65 meters per second, which was not as fast as a rocket launcher. But when the wings were unfolded and the propulsion device was activated, the flying speed would increase sharply and could exceed the speed of sound in a very short time. Because he was distracted by the child, She didn't notice the strangeness outside the house. By the time he reacted, the missile was already right in front of him. Boom! The sudden explosion instantly set off a burst of intense flames and thick smoke. The overwhelming flames covered more than half of the villa. Xianxia rushed out of the villa to take a look. She saw Shi standing at the door of the villa, his right hand raised in the air. A semicircular invisible shield blocked the flames and smoke set off by the explosion in the air. Xianxia looked up and saw every detail. The raging flames above the villa looked terrifying, but it was like a monster locked in a glass room. It could only roar and wreak havoc outside. It was like watching a silent movie. The invisible shield even blocked the sound, so only the dancing flames in the sky could be seen, but no sound could be heard. Shi withdrew his right hand, and some small flames fell from the sky. What followed were some pitch-black oil and debris, which were the remains of the missile. No need to search, the person is definitely not here. Ha! What do you mean? If I'm not wrong, this base is just a cover-up. After hearing his words, Xianxia frowned and began to think. When she stood behind Shi and was about to say something, Shi suddenly jumped up from the ground and flew directly into the air. As he flew higher and higher, the topography of Meimen appeared clearly in front of Shi. The base, the village, the sea of poppy flowers. From a high vantage point, he could see everything clearly. The base seemed to be very big, but there were not many people inside, which was very unreasonable. Moreover, as soon as they stepped into the villa, a missile was fired at them. This also meant that someone was definitely secretly observing them. Shi was too lazy to play the game of cat and mouse with them, so he directly flew up. He wanted to see what other tricks this newly emerged drug lord had up his sleeve. Shi hovered in the air, carefully observing every detail below. Because his divine sense had not been restored, he could only use this method to find the enemy's traces. While he was looking around, about 700 or 800 meters behind the base, there was a small soil slope. Suddenly, there was a slight noise from below the soil slope. Immediately afterward, a gate suddenly appeared on the soil slope. After the gate opened, something slowly rose from below. A missile launcher. Unlike the empty shelf in the center of the base, there were already 4 pottery missiles on it. In just a few seconds, the launcher was ready, and the warhead was aimed at Xianxia in the sky. However, just as the first missile flew off the launcher, Xianxia suddenly raised his right palm, and his palm was facing the missile. Just like a traffic policeman directing traffic, the missile suddenly stopped in mid-air. 2 seconds later, the missile's wings opened, and the propulsion device was fully activated. Accompanied by a strong and dazzling fire, the smoke at the tail of the missile became thicker and thicker, and its body began to tremble violently. However, no matter how hard the propulsion device tried, the missile could not fly forward. After another 3 seconds, just as the second missile was about to leave the launcher, Xianxia suddenly clenched her fingers. He grasped the air. That invisible true essence seemed to have substance, and in an instant, it exploded the first missile, and also detonated the 3 missiles next to it. Boom! It shook the sky and the earth, and dust flew everywhere. The violent explosion instantly flattened the entire soil slope, and a huge cloud of smoke suddenly rose from below the soil slope. When the smoke and dust dispersed, the launcher hidden under the soil slope was completely exposed. Of course, only ruins were left. It had to be said that this drug lord called Wuxia was indeed very creative, and he even specially built a fake base to attract the attention of the outside world. The Sea of Poppies was here, and this was the lifeblood of drug lords, so his base would not be too far away. Underground. Xianxia looked down with interest, and then suddenly flew to a nearby soil slope. This was the largest soil slope in the vicinity, and it did not seem to have anything special. But with Xianxia's eyesight, he could see that there was a trace of something strange in the middle of the soil slope. Found you! He raised his hand and blasted a stream of true essence. After the dust flew everywhere, a pitch-black hole was revealed from the bottom of the soil. It was an entrance about 5 meters long and 3 meters high. Just like the entrance to the underground garage, at first glance, it was dark below. Xianxia landed at the entrance of the hole, and then directly walked in. However, waiting for him was a group of fully armed soldiers. Intense gunshots suddenly rang out from underground, and the crazily gushing flames almost lit up the underground tunnel. A true essence barrier instantly appeared in front of Xianxia. Just like an umbrella, it blocked the bullets that rained down like a storm. All the bullets that flew in front of Xianxia strangely stopped in mid-air. In a short while, an iron wall made of bullets appeared in front of Xianxia. The afternoon sun shone in from outside the hole, and the soldiers stood at the bottom of the tunnel, so they could not see the figure of the person clearly. They looked up, and no matter how hard they tried, they could only see a vague shadow at the entrance of the tunnel. After estimating that even a tank would be penetrated, the soldiers stopped firing. At this time, Xianxia waved his hand. The wall of bullets in front of him suddenly turned into a rainstorm, and shot at the people below. In an instant, the end of the tunnel became a hell on earth, and endless screams and wails echoed. Xianxia slowly walked down the tunnel. When he reached the bottom of the tunnel, there was no one alive. At this moment, he was the incarnation of the god of death. Chapter 161. The explosion just now caught Qin Xueqing's attention. Although she couldn't fly, her running speed wasn't slow. As soon as Xianxia walked into the tunnel, she had already rushed over. Martial artists were too weak in the face of modern weapons. It was fine if it was an assassination, but when it came to a large-scale confrontation like this, she could only hide in the back and cheer. After all, she couldn't compare to a non-human existence, right? So even if she didn't want to admit defeat, she could only obediently hide behind Xianxia and follow her cheap brother-in-law to sweep through everything. The underground base was about the size of 3 or 4 football fields, about the same size as the fake base outside. The height of the entire space was at least 4 or 5 stories high, and it didn't feel oppressive at all. There weren't many people in the fake base because everyone was hiding here. As far as the eye could see, rows of military tents were placed in the open space, and many workers in white coats and masks were constantly coming in and out of the tents. Although there were many ventilation devices, The entire underground space was filled with a sour smell. This was because the purification of drugs required acetic acid. How was this a military base? It was clearly a huge drug manufacturing factory. At the same time, it was also an inexhaustible natural treasury. After Chen killed the soldiers at the end of the tunnel, he stepped into the air and walked directly over the pile of corpses. Xianxia didn't have his ability, so she could only jump into the open space on the opposite side. Then they were surrounded. With the two of them as the center, hundreds of fully armed soldiers fanned out and pointed their guns at them. However, this time, the other party seemed to have learned their lesson, so they didn't immediately attack. Chen glanced around. Wherever his gaze landed, the soldiers all retreated in fear. The originally slightly loose encirclement was expanded by his gaze just like that. Only one person didn't move. It was a middle-aged man with dark skin. He looked to be in his 40s and was about 1.8 meters tall. Compared to the Nanyang people around him, his height was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Respected Celestial, greetings. The middle-aged man's Chinese was much more standard than Bairongqing's, so Chen immediately frowned and asked, "Are you from Wuxia?" "No, I'm from Shan." "All right, as long as you're happy." Although he didn't want to admit it, most of the big drug lords in the Golden Triangle who wreaked havoc all over the world were actually Chinese. Even Kun Sa, who had almost unified the Golden Triangle, was from Jianghu. This middle-aged man was Bacha, the leader of Mayman, a true warlord and drug lord. After hearing Chen seemingly joking reply, Bachar immediately felt relieved. He quickly turned his head and gestured to the attendant beside him. When the evil people in this world were truly ruthless, there was really no bottom line. After a deep sigh, Chen suddenly asked, "Just now you wanted to fight, now you want to surrender, are you so sure that I'll let you go?" No, I'm not sure." Bacha shook his head and said calmly, "I didn't know that you were a celestial being, so I dared to offend you. Now that I know, I naturally have to change the way to solve the problem." "Solve the problem? How? With the people behind you?" After saying this, Chen once again scanned the surroundings. As far as his eyes could see, the soldiers all retreated. At this moment, he was like Zhang Fei at the Changban slope. His roar scared Xianxia to death, and he alone forced the millions of Chao soldiers to retreat. After seeing his inhuman methods, the morale of the soldiers fell to the bottom. Because they weren't facing a human at all, how could they fight? However, Bacha seemed to have already expected Chen reaction. So after hearing Chen words, he didn't panic at all. Instead, as if he was making an introduction, he calmly said, "When I first built this underground base, I already buried 5,000 tons of explosives. 5,000 tons of explosives was equivalent to 8,000 Tomahawk missiles, which was also equivalent to a quarter of the Hiroshima nuclear explosion. And this was his trump card." Chapter 162. Chen expression didn't change at all when he heard that there were 5,000 tons of explosives buried here. Seeing this, Ba Cha continued, 5,000 tons of explosives isn't a threat. It's a means of self-protection. Just like a gecko cutting off its tail or a pufferfish bloating, it's an animal's instinct. Maybe you think this is ridiculous, but it's the only way I can protect myself. No one knew of your existence before, so I dared to offend you. I'm just following orders. I hope you can understand my difficulties. Ba Cha kept a low profile. Chen didn't speak, as if he was thinking about something. But at this moment, there was a strange movement in the tunnel behind him. Qin Shueqing quickly looked back. Two gates suddenly extended out from the walls on both sides. The speed of the gate closing was very fast, and within a few seconds, it had already firmly closed together, completely sealing off their way back. Judging from this, Ba Cha was obviously prepared to fight to the death. Every celestial was a legendary existence. In fact, they couldn't be considered human anymore. After all, how could humans fly in the sky? Before receiving the mission, Ba Cha had a bad feeling. He thought he could take advantage of the recent turmoil in Wulian, but he didn't expect to kick an iron plate. No, it was a steel plate. Although a great grandmaster in the Aura state could control objects with qi, This kind of celestial being who could pinch and explode missiles in the air could not even break the aura shield when faced with the suppressive firepower of a reinforced company, and could even shoot back all the bullets. Ba Cha was completely out of ideas. Since he couldn't beat them, he could only fight to the death. Anyway, a celestial's life was much more valuable than an ant's life. Ba Cha was a famous drug lord, so he had already put his life on the line. So after he made up his mind, a faint smile appeared on his face, as if victory was already in his hands. Celestials weren't afraid of missiles because missiles couldn't hit them. Now the entire base had become a sealed can. Once it exploded, the celestials in the center of the explosion were no different from ants like them. They would still turn into ashes. However, just as Ba Cha was feeling proud of himself, Xianxia smiled faintly. "Have you played Fight the Landlord?" Ba Cha was stunned. He didn't expect him to suddenly ask such a question. Before Ba Cha could answer, Xianxia directly asked a second question. "Do you know what's bigger than a king bomb?" Bigger than a king bomb. Ba Cha was confused. He thought there was a deeper meaning in Xianxia's words, so he immediately thought carefully about it. "For twos?" No, in Fight the Landlord, the king bomb was the biggest card? He was still pondering. Xianxia had already given him an answer. Chapter 163. What did you guys do? Old Dog's eyes almost fell out of their sockets when he saw the mushroom cloud rising into the sky. He turned around and was about to say something to Qin Shueqing when the ground shook violently. There were many mountains in the Golden Triangle. After the explosion, the nearby mountains shook violently. The sudden shaking startled the horse. It neighed and raised its front hooves. If Old Dog had not pulled the horse back in time, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei would have been thrown off the horse. The explosion happened underground. 5,000 tons of explosives was theoretically enough to trigger a magnitude 4 earthquake. Because the speed of sound was much slower than earthquake waves and light waves, Old Dog only heard the earth-shattering explosion after about 10 seconds. It was like a muffled thunder in summer. It was loud and continuous, resounding through the sky. Old Dog was so frightened that he jumped up. Even the old dog was scared, let alone the animals. In an instant, all the birds in the forest were frightened and flew out of the forest. They covered the sky and the earth, even blocking the sunlight. The birds flapped their wings. It was as if it was raining. The horse whined and raised its hooves to gallop away. Old Dog was not paying attention and the reins slipped out of his hands. The horse rushed forward with Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei on it. Ning Zhonghua hugged the horse's neck tightly while Su Wei hugged Ning Zhonghua's waist tightly. The two unlucky fellows sat on the horse's back, shouting for help as they were carried away by the horse. The tremor lasted for about a minute. Unlike when they came, the four of them were running all the way back. So after a while, they returned to the small village from which they came. Because of the big explosion just now, the villagers in the village were so frightened that they all ran out. The adults and children were all gathered together, chattering about something that no one knew what. Qin Shueqing saw Xianxia standing in the sea of poppy flowers at a glance. He seemed to be thinking about something. Qin Shueqing came close behind him. After pondering for a moment, she suddenly asked, "You want to destroy these things?" Hearing this, Xianxia sighed deeply. Then he smiled and said, "I did have such a plan just now. But after thinking about it carefully, I realized I really don't have that ability." Even the moon had been conquered, yet humans were defeated by a small plant. Was he really unable to resist it? Actually, that wasn't the case. Drugs were easy to suppress, but not the human heart. Put out the poppies, marijuana, morphine, cocaine. Even if these plants were completely wiped out, humans would still research new types of chemical drugs. He could destroy Mayman and the Golden Triangle, but he could not call back the hearts of those who had abandoned themselves. Qin Shueqing understood what Xianxia meant. Qin Ruing immediately rolled her eyes at him. At this time, the little girl also looked up and saw Xianxia. "Papa, you're back." With a clear sound of "Papa," the little girl let go of Qin Ruing's hand, waved her arms and ran toward Xianxia. Xianxia quickly squatted down and held the little girl in his arms. After Xianxia stood up with her in his arms, the little girl sat in Xianxia's arms and handed the Barbie doll to Xianxia. She pouted and said coquettishly, "Papa, dolls are not fun." Looking at the Barbie doll that was twisted like a fried dough twist, Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly comforted her, "You can't play with Barbie dolls like this. Papa will teach you later, okay?" Okay. The little girl nodded happily. In fact, she didn't care much about what she played. She cared more about who would play with her. Qin Ruing came over, and Xianxia quickly freed his left hand to hold her hand. "Where's Yuan Qing?" "She's in Spring City. She'll be back tomorrow." "Is she all right?" "She's fine. It's just a broken hand. She'll recover when she reaches the gold core stage." "How long will it take?" "With her diligence, I don't think it'll take long." "That's true. I want to eat braised lion's head." A noise suddenly came from the middle, interrupting the couple's conversation. It turned out that the little girl was a little unhappy because they kept talking and neglected her. "Okay, Papa will make it for you. What else do you want to eat?" "Kung Pao chicken." "Okay, what else?" "Pork ribs, sweet and sour pork ribs." "Okay, Papa will make it for you." "Papa is the best." "What about Mommy?" "Mommy is good too." "Then you go and put on your shoes. When you're done, we'll go out." "Okay." The little girl ran back to put on her shoes. Xianxia's cooking was much better than KFC's, and the little girl was just looking for something new. Qin Ruoying naturally didn't have any objections to eating a meal once in a while, so she let it be. The tea house closed early again. The family of three stepped on the light snow and walked to Dongming Alley. When they passed by the courtyard, Xianxia suddenly asked Qin Ruoying to wait for him, and then ran into the courtyard like a wisp of smoke. After waiting for a while, Xianxia came out again. When Qin Ruoying saw his secretive look, she knew that he must be up to something again. Thus, she looked at him with a faint smile, waiting for him to explain himself. Seeing this, Xianxia didn't hide anything and immediately took out two things from behind her. Dang dang dang, when Qin Ruoying saw it, she suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry. Xianxia held the household register in his hand, one for her, and the other for Xianxia and Yan. After seeing the household register, Qin Ruoying understood what he wanted to do, so she asked with a smile, "Do you still care about these things?" "Of course, we have a child illegally living together, so we have to make up for it." At this time, the little girl grabbed the household register in Xianxia's hand, and then curiously turned it over. "Papa, what is this?" She did not know how to read, so she pointed to the 5 characters on it and asked, "Household register. Come on, Papa will teach you how to read." Holding the little girl in his arms, Xianxia pointed to the Chinese characters on the household register and taught her to read. The family of 3 walked out of the alley. When they were about to walk out of the alley, Qin Ruoying suddenly could not help looking back at the familiar alley. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the past. At that time, she would walk through this alley every day. But at that time she did not think. Chapter 165. After the family of 3 left Dongming Alley, Xianxia took a taxi and went straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The Civil Affairs Bureau was a magical place. Compared to the Human Resources and Social Security Bureau, the Civil Affairs Bureau was much more leisurely. The door was open, and anyone could come and go. What was even more amazing was that next to the marriage counter was the divorce counter. They went in and came out. They went in again and came out again. Countless gratitude and grudges, and endless expressions of all living beings. Today was not a big day, and the weather was not good, so there were not many people who came to go through the formalities. As soon as the family of 3 walked into the hall, countless eyes fell on them. It couldn't be helped. Compared to ordinary people, Xianxia and Qin Ruoying's looks were too high. Some people who did not know the situation even thought that they were an unknown celebrity couple. What was even more eye-catching was that Xianxia was holding a lively and cute little girl in his arms. The child was already so big, but they still came to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Obviously, they were here to go through the divorce procedures. The young couple looked quite compatible. They were probably young and immature, so they got married and divorced impulsively. This kind of thing was common in the Civil Affairs Bureau. What a pity. Countless people secretly sighed. However, what made everyone's jaws drop was Xianxia did not take the divorce registration number, but the marriage registration number. When he came to the marriage registration counter with the number, the staff around him could not help but look at him. It was not unheard of to get on the bus first and then buy the ticket, but it was really rare to see someone come to buy the ticket when they were almost at the terminal. There were very few people getting married today, so it was Xianxia's turn immediately. He put the little fellow down, and then he and Qin Ruoying held the little fellow's hand as they walked to the counter. The Civil Affairs Bureau was under the control of the local government, so the policies and charging standards were slightly different in each place. It was okay in Shangjing. Taking the number, filling in the form, taking photos, and getting the certificate cost 9 yuan, and taking photos 30 yuan. As long as the procedures were complete, they could get the marriage certificate in 20 minutes. When Xianxia got 2 brand new marriage certificates from the registration counter, a very strange feeling suddenly surged from his heart. They got married just like that. Unlike the excitement of a wedding, when they were getting their marriage certificate, they felt an indescribable heaviness. This was not a derogatory term, but a complimentary one. It was a very complicated feeling. Perhaps it was his sense of responsibility. He looked at the marriage certificate in his hand and then looked at his lover beside him. Even the look in his eyes was slightly different. Xianxia wanted to show the marriage certificate to Qin Ruoying, but the little girl in her arms snatched it away. The little fellow looked at her parents in the photo and giggled for a while. Then, she suddenly stopped smiling and pouted at Xianxia. "Papa, why am I not in the photo?" Without waiting for Xianxia to reply, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately shouted, "Family portrait! Family portrait! I want to be in there too." This was a public place. Besides those who were preparing to get married, there were also those who were preparing to get divorced. Many people were already in a bad mood, so when they heard her words, their faces immediately darkened. "Shoo, you can't be loud in public." Qin Ruoying quickly stopped the little fellow. Showing affection in this place was simply rubbing salt on other people's wounds, so it was better to restrain herself. In order to meet the little fellow's request, the couple quickly took her to a corner, and then Xianxia took out his mobile phone. Click. The couple leaned close to each other. The little fellow sat in the middle of them, holding her little face with both hands and sticking out her little tongue to make a face. Looking at this family portrait, both of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The little fellow took the mobile phone from Xianxia. When she saw herself in the mobile phone, she immediately seemed to have succeeded in a prank and couldn't help but giggle. Just as the 3 of them were showing off their love, a couple in front of the divorce counter started arguing. Marriage required a photo of the 2 people, and divorce required a photo of 1 person. Because the size of the photo provided by the woman was not up to standard, there was no way to go through the formalities, so the man asked the woman to go out and take another photo. The woman was unwilling, so the 2 of them quarreled in the hall. "You're deliberately looking for trouble, aren't you? You've done it twice and you still can't get it done. Let me tell you, I don't want to do it a 3rd time. Are you in such a hurry to marry that vixen?" The man's attitude was very bad, so the woman's mood immediately rose, and she opened her mouth to retort. Their voices were very loud, and they immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. When the man heard the woman's words, he was so angry that even his face turned red, so he roared angrily, "Watch your mouth. At this point, both of us know what's going on. Don't embarrass yourself here with me." The woman was stunned. After hesitating for a moment, she suddenly threw herself into the man's arms. Then, the woman cried bitterly as she lay in the man's arms and murmured, "I don't want a divorce. I don't want it. Let's start over, okay?" "Okay." The man was also stunned. Looking at the most familiar stranger in front of him, the oath he once made immediately echoed in his ears. After all, she was the person he was most familiar with. After a deep sigh, the man didn't push the woman away, but gently hugged her. At this moment, the staff at the counter smiled and said, "Why don't you 2 go back and think about it?" She came twice, but she even got the size wrong. Was this woman really that stupid? It was because she didn't want a divorce. Looking for trouble. This was the last way she could think of to delay it. However, after hearing the staff's words, The man gently shook his head. He whispered a few words to the woman, then pulled her out of the hole. This kind of episode happened almost every day, so the staff had long been numb to it. Seeing that the man and woman seemed to be in a dilemma for a while, he directly called the next number. The little girl looked at the scene in front of her in a daze. With her young mind, she really couldn't understand the complexity of it. After seeing the man and woman leave, the little girl raised her head and asked in confusion, "Why is Auntie crying?" "Because she's going to be separated from Uncle." "Why does Uncle want to be separated from Auntie?" She didn't know how to answer. After hesitating for a moment, he had to smile and rub the little girl's head, and then very stiffly changed the topic. "Come, let Dad hug you and let Mom rest. We're done with our business. Now I'll take you to eat KFC. Are you happy?" "Yes." As soon as she heard about KFC, the little girl fell into the trap. After obediently climbing into Xi's arms, she began to talk about what she wanted to eat later. Then, under the envious eyes of many people, She held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other hand, and slowly walked out of the marriage registration office. Marriage was like a carved ship. It depended on how you appreciated it and how you steered it. If you were wise, even if you didn't know your lover before marriage, you could be respectful to your lover after marriage. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.